Thank you. It's John Pienaar here at 4 o'clock with Times Radio Drive, and here are the headlines. European leaders are demanding changes to ECHR rules to curb migration. And President Zelensky says there'll be more US-Ukraine talks today with a new 20-point plan to be handed over to the Americans later. And coming up, as European countries, including the UK, agree to negotiate a new approach to the European Convention on Human Rights, I'll talk to an expert on the legislation and to a Labour MP. And after the death of a British paratrooper in Ukraine, I'll ask what the UK military is doing on the ground in that country.
The UK, on DAB digital radio, on the free Times Radio app, online and on your smart speaker. Quality journalism, analysis and opinion that speaks for itself. John Pienaar at Drive on Times Radio.
Hello, thanks for joining me. I'm John Pienaar with Drive on Times Radio. Now, momentous history-making events sometimes seem almost mundane now, I know, but that doesn't make them any less momentous. Last night, it seemed almost unremarkable for the Pope to openly, publicly accuse President Trump of deliberately setting out to destroy the Atlantic alliance with Europe and calling Trump as wrong. But he did that, and it was remarkable. President Trump's faltering support for Ukraine and his declaration of disdain for Europe and its leaders Well, this is world-changing stuff, and I am looking forward now to hearing the analysis of Britain's highly regarded and best-selling historian Anthony Beevor on this. That's coming just after 5. And in a moment, let's look at the major change that's being considered on human rights law. It's picking up momentum, perhaps. Now, why is that? Well, too many migrants are using human rights law, exploiting the right to a family life, for example, to escape deportation and stay in this country when they try and fail to claim asylum. No, I'm not quoting Nigel Farage or the Conservatives. This is Keir Starmer and Labour. And today the government is arguing in the Council of Europe, the 46-nation organisation behind the European Convention on Human Rights, to call for changes in that treaty to make our human rights law tougher when it comes to rights that are now seen as an escape clause for migrants wanting to avoid deportation. What was once, and quite recently, unthinkable for Labour is now official policy. The Tories in reform would go further, of course, and quit the European Convention altogether. It's a policy arms race, and Starmer is very open in a joint article with the Danish leader Mette Frederiksen that Labour is seeking change to try to hold at bay right-wing populist opponents who are gaining support by promising to go further. That and the need, and there is no attempt to deny this, to regain lost trust in Britain's ability to control migration and police our borders. So our countries that have decades been taking pride in respect for basic human rights and the laws that back it up, are they about to rewrite those laws and effectively declare migration a crisis? Send me a text. What do you think? 87222, start with the word Times, or a tweet to @TimesRadio. Let's look at it. More than half of all European nations have agreed on the need to make changes to ECHR rules. It's supported by Britain, of course, as I say. It's to make it easier to deport foreigners who have wanted to be deported by this government. Matt Dathan is the Times Home Affairs editor. Hello to you, Matt.
Good afternoon, John.
Hi, Matt. Welcome. So, first of all, very basic question. Is the balance tilting in the Council of Europe towards the European Convention on Human Rights? Does it look as if change is on the way?
It certainly looks like some form of change is on the way, but the big question is just how far that change will go. And it's very uncertain as to what that change will be. We've got 27 member states, so more than half, so there's 46 member states signed up to the European Convention on Human Rights, have published this joint statement which goes way further than the draft conclusions of the official summit of 46 justice ministers today in Strasbourg. And the interesting omissions in that 27 are France and Germany, which are two big power brokers in the Council of Europe, which is the which oversees the convention. So I think there's a long way to go, because we've got to remember that any kind of change to the protocol, the framework of the convention, and the way it's interpreted in the European Court must be unanimous and unanimously agreed by 46 member states.
That's a very, very high bar to clear here, though, Matt. And there are still deep-rooted differences on this. I mean, here we've got celebrities like Stephen Fry and Joanna Lumley pitching in against the sort of changes that are now being talked about. There are some in the Labour Party who have their doubts. And, of course, the Liberal Democrats, they represent another, that strand of opinion too. I wonder how widely spread is this deep division of opinion? One assumes, in many ways, across Europe.
Yes, there's deep divisions across the member states, but there's also deep divisions. I think there'll be a lot of resistance within the Council of Europe to any kind of fundamental change to the way we interpret the convention rights, because we've seen, despite Keir Starmer and his Danish counterpart being very strong this morning, despite this letter of 27 member states saying that we need mechanisms to enable the expulsion of foreign criminals, we need the convention not to block countries from agreeing their own unilateral deals to send migrants to third countries like Rwanda or to other countries under return hubs. Despite this very strong political intention from the leaders of these countries, we're seeing very strong pushback from the Council of Europe. The Council of Europe's Human Rights Commissioner has said basically we must have no fundamental change in the convention. The parliamentary grouping within the Council of Europe, which also includes some of our MPs, says the same. It says that that the rights enshrined under the convention must apply to all citizens, not just the domestic citizens, i.e. they must be applied to foreign criminals equally as to domestic citizens as well.
Right. It does sound, Matt, as if change is coming. It's going to be a pretty slow process.
Yes, so today was about drawing up a draft plan, effectively, in which we'll then go to negotiations from now until May, when they will meet again. The foreign ministers will meet in Moldova, and the idea is to agree a joint political declaration in Moldova that will then, they hope, well, Britain hopes, and 26 other member states hopes, that that's derive and create a specific plan to make sure that the European Court does not overinterpret, in their opinion, the convention, to stop those countries from deporting foreign criminals and agreeing third-party deals. But as we've seen in the past, in 2012, David Cameron met in Brighton. It's called the Brighton Convention. There was a political declaration drawn up from that about changes to the way in which the convention was interpreted. It took another 10 years, in fact, for that political declaration to actually even take effect. And it was nothing like the wording that David Cameron wanted back in 2012.
All right, Matt Dathan, as always, thanks so much. Now, joining me now in the studio to share his views, Dr. Andy Hoxha, who is a lecturer in law at King's College London and also Associate Fellow at the Royal United Institute for Security and Defence. Hello to you, Andy. Thank you for coming.
Thank you for inviting me.
So tell me, the European Convention, it stood for, 75 years or so. Do you agree with those who say that it has been overtaken by events, especially mass migration?
So the convention is over 75 years old, and absolutely it needs to reform. And there are arguments there that are solid that require reform, because any treaty that is older than 75 years was drawn up and established for a completely different era, which that was after the Second World War. And at that time, we needed peace and security, and of course, to upheld any of those atrocities that happened after the Second World War. But we have changed, and Europe has changed, and we have much better legislations in place. So there is a debate there, and I do agree with those that do argue that the convention has to be reformed. Now, in terms of what sort of reform they take place, absolutely that's up to the debate, and until we kind of see the details. From what we saw from the communication today, there were two key things that sort of stood out. So one is to reinterpret the right to family life and how that is defined. And in particular, we have seen cases across Europe where foreign criminals that they would like to deport do use this clause to stay in that specific country, and there is a argument there to be made that should be loosened up. And then the second one is for European countries to be able to set up return migration hubs that are in line with a human rights standard. So those are sort of the two things that all of the parties will be working on until May.
Right. When we talk about worries about the use of the protection for family life, we're talking about people who are denied asylum, and the country wants to get them out of the country, and sometimes foreign criminals. So when it comes to family life, how deeply divided is the membership of the Council of Europe? How deeply divided is Europe on that question?
So before it was quite divided on the question, and their sort of worries were, because if you start to sort of take away different rights, and then where do you stop? So that was their concern. So that's why they were very protected. But we can see that there's a lot of pressure by taxpayers where they're keeping foreign criminals imprisoned, and some of them they shouldn't be there, and they're making use of some of the loopholes within the legislation. So that's absolutely a right argument to be made.
So do you think that is a change which looks as if it could be coming there?
It is very likely because the majority of them,
but it needs unanimity, doesn't it?
It will require, but we have seen major European countries, the UK, Italy, Germany, France, and even Greece are arguing for it because they see a similar path. So it could potentially happen. So until May, there will be a political process in terms of how this will be defined. But at the same time, what they are arguing is to have a policy in place where courts could look at how they interpret these specific clauses.
Yeah. Now, look, another provision which is in the spotlight is the protection against torture, and that has been used by those seeking to avoid deportation. But that's not just about the European Convention on Human Rights, is it? There's also an International Convention against Torture. So even if there is change in the European Convention, would that not leave that further protection to be considered and dealt with?
So on that specific part part that you're discussing and describing, that the best possible way would be for countries to set up return deals with the countries of origin. Because the biggest debate, what we are actually having right now, is that we have a number of citizens from countries that we do not have return agreements.
Yes.
And they would make use of these specific legislation and provisions to argue that you cannot return us because of X, Y, Z.
So do you see the Council of Europe agreeing to allow the use of these return hubs, as they're called?
It could potentially be, because if you have half of the countries that are in favor, the political momentum could be there. But the focus shouldn't purely be on the changing the convention itself. It should also be another approach, and that is that countries need to sign up a new return agreement with a number of countries. And the third one, they need to sort of designate which country is a safe country or not, because that's also being part of it. So that has to be included as a package, because if we are putting all of our eggs in one basket, which means if we reform the convention and we're going to solve this problem, that would not happen.
All right, Dr. Andy Hoxford, King's College London, thank you.
Thank you.
Most helpful. Now, before the show, I sat down with a Labour MP, Rosie Writing, and asked her when it was that she came to the view that our legislation was based on a human rights convention, which in its present form is no longer fit for purpose.
Immigration is something that was raised with me, maybe more so than any other topic, and has been since. And I think whilst, yes, of course, immigration brings so much to our country, to Kettering, to our society, there is legitimate questions there. And it's important as politicians that we listen to those legitimate questions and we reform a system. We have a moral obligation in this country, which Shabana Mahmood is doing, to reform the asylum seeking process, to make sure that it's fair. We can act with compassion, but we can still be fair and uphold the law.
But in what respects, then, is our Human Rights Act and our adherence to the Human Rights Convention, in what respects, in particular, is it now lacking?
When it comes to Article 8 and Article 3, which have been most commonly used in appeals processes to deportations, they're both important. But like I said, this is not about ripping up the HCR, do not agree with that and what people are saying from Reform and the Conservatives, but it's about modernising it so it works for today's society. And we are seeing within immigration, we're seeing a different world. We are seeing mass migration. We are seeing things like small boats, which, by the way, nobody should be getting on a small boat and risking their lives in the Channel. But in order to have a fair system where we still act with compassion, but we uphold the laws, we do need to reform the HCR. And that's what David Lammy has been talking about today.
Sure. But Article 8 and Article 3, just take us through your worries about those particular parts.
Well, it's more that they've most commonly been used in the appeals process.
What do they do? Just for our listeners, what are we talking about?
So we're talking about Article 3. By the way, I do want to say both of these, we can have domestic policy because, of course, human rights should be the cornerstone of any government, of any.
But I just think we need to explain to our listeners what Article 8 and Article 3 do and why they are a problem.
So Article 8 is the right to a family life.
Yeah.
And Article 3 is the one that surrounds kind of inhumane torture, things like that. Both absolutely, which is why I'm someone who believes that it's fundamental that we stay a part of the ECHR, are really, really important. But both have been used as blockers when it comes to deporting people who don't have the right to be here. So it's about
So just to keep people with us who are listening to this, if we can. I mean, how many cases have there been of asylum claimants who were denied asylum and then used the right to family life or fear of torture wrongly?
Well, I'm not in the Home Office. I don't know those exact numbers, and it's also worth mentioning that today there was an op-ed both with the leaders of the UK, Keir Starmer, and of Denmark as well. So this isn't just a unique problem to us. Reforming the ECHR has benefits to other European countries as well. This hasn't just been a blocker here. But I don't know the exact numbers, but I do know that this has blocked cases where people haven't had the right to be here. Therefore, we have needed to deport them and haven't been able to. And I think
on the politics of this, then, is this about closing loopholes, which are a serious problem in terms of many people exploiting what was a legitimate right to wrongly stay in the country? Or is it about a perception that our human rights law has become a problem? And it's about heading off arguments that are coming from parties like Reform and the Conservative Party, who are outbidding you on this. You want to stay ahead in this race, in this policy arms race.
No, I don't believe that at all, because I think that people have legitimate concerns when it comes to immigration. And by the way, like I said, I'm someone who really, really strongly believes that immigration is such a positive thing for our society, for the area that I represent and our country. We wouldn't be where we are without immigration. But at the moment, we do have a system that we inherited that is in chaos. And I think people broadly do believe that immigration is a good thing when there is a fair system. One that we've always been a compassionate country. Throughout history, we have gave refuge and a home to people who've needed it most, and that is the fundamental part of being British. But we need transparency, we need fairness, and we are living in a different world at the moment, and one that means that we need, in order to deport people who don't have the right to be here, reform to the EHCR.
Right, so Britain and a number of other signatories to the convention in the Council of Europe are seeking the kind of changes that you're talking about. What if those changes are not possible? Would you then contemplate quitting the convention altogether, which is what your political opponents here are saying they would do?
Well, I think my political opponent, Reform, and shockingly actually the Conservative Party, have got to quite a scary place in this. I don't think we should be leaving these international conventions.
So what if the changes you're seeking are
human rights.
And what if the changes you're seeking are not allowed to happen?
Well, we're not in that place at the moment.
No, but it's a reasonable hypothetical. We're at the beginning of an active political discussion with an end in view. If it's not achievable, then what?
Yeah, but I believe because of Britain's position internationally that we are in a place to urge other European leaders to follow suit and look at reforms to the HCR. I don't think that we live in a world of hypotheticals. I think that now we feel like this is how we're going to get to the place that we want to be, where there's a fair and transparent system. And I think that because of the leadership we're seeing, that's where we'll get to.
Are you saying there's no circumstances then that you would consider leaving the convention?
I personally feel as though we have international human rights conventions for a reason. Like I just spoke about at the beginning, justice has been brought to victims through some of the most tragic and awful of circumstances because we've been a member of the HCR. I think that should continue to be upheld, but I think we do need to modernise and reform so it's fit for today's society.
Across the UK, on DAB, online and on your smart speaker. John Pienaar at Drive on Times Radio.
Now, the Prime Minister has named the British soldier who died in Ukraine yesterday.
The whole House will join me in sending our deepest sympathy and condolences to the family and loved ones of Lance Corporal George Hooley of the Parachute Regiment, who died yesterday in Ukraine. Lance Corporal Hooley was injured in a tragic accident away from the front lines while observing Ukrainian forces testing a new defensive capability. His life was full of courage and determination. He served our country with honour and distinction around the world in the cause of freedom and democracy, including as part of the small number of British personnel in Ukraine. Mr. Speaker, I place his name on record today to express our gratitude and respect and to affirm that his service will never be forgotten.
The Prime Minister speaking in the House of Commons a little earlier. Now, Larissa Brown is here with us. Welcome to you, Larissa.
Thank you.
So, I mean, you will have a lot of knowledge of this as Times Defence editor. It seems even the presence of members of the Parachute Regiment in Ukraine has not been disclosed before. What do we know? What's actually been publicly said about what this soldier was doing there?
Well, in terms of what the Ministry of Defence have said, they've said that he was helping to test some equipment, a new weapon for the Ukrainians. I was told last night that the test basically went badly wrong. Someone suggested to me it involved something to do with an explosion or ammunition, but they weren't quite firm on those details. And today, I had it confirmed that they were working on an air defence system of some sort, but nobody has gone into the details on what exactly that was. I do know that the UK has been helping the Ukrainians as part of a project called Project Octopus, and that's to help produce these interceptor drones, which are designed to shoot down Russian drones in the skies. It's possible it could be part of that program, but I haven't got that confirmed.
Yeah, and the fact that if information is scarce is very easy, I guess, to understand. I mean, we have known, it's been pretty commonly known that there have been British military personnel in Ukraine for a while now. Not much has been said about what they're doing there. I can recall talk of medical personnel helping with that sort of training and maybe other training roles. So look, given we don't know, given we can't disclose what should not be disclosed because we don't have that information, what is the expert assumption about what British soldiers may be doing there?
Well, as you say, we know that British Special Forces have been operating in the country. So we know that there is a presence of Special Forces, but the government won't confirm or deny
and what
that.
sort of work is it conceivable they might be doing?
You're testing me, John, because I'm not sure what I can say and what I can't.
Yeah.
I think there's a presence of Special Forces carrying out various activities there. And there's medics, there's a small team of medics, which the government has said has confirmed.
Yes.
And there's also in the past been some reports of troops in the country helping to train on equipment. And perhaps this is a case of that. Now, what I hadn't heard before is members of the Parachute Regiment being inside Ukraine. Now, they're not Special Forces. And so I found that quite interesting today that they are in the country. And I think a lot of people will be asking those questions like, well, what are they doing then exactly? Yeah. Given that the Parachute Regiment, it's a conventional unit. It's not like Special Forces where the government can say, well, we were not going to tell you anything about it. So I did find that quite surprising. Right.
I mean, I completely understand your hesitation, believe me. And I know it can be tricky to have more knowledge than you can possibly disclose. It makes conversations like this a little bit awkward sometimes. But I totally understand. And thanks again for coming in, Larissa.
No problem.
Maybe I can talk now to John Foreman. I think he's on the line, a former British Defence attaché in Moscow and in Kyiv. Hello to you, John.
Hello, John.
What are your thoughts on what you've been hearing?
Well, first I'd like to express my condolences to the family and friends of Lance Corporal Hooley. He comes from the Parachute Regiment. It's an elite unit, the elite regiment with a proud history of selfless sacrifice and service to the country. But it's also a reminder, I think, that military service is not without risk. We had a seaman from the Royal British Auxiliary washed over the side of a ship back in November, and it says, unfortunately, these things happen. I mean, I think Larissa was quite right. I think we've had a long, proud history of supporting the Ukrainian armed forces and the Ukrainian Ministry of Defence. When I was there 15 years ago, we helped them with training, with exercises and advice, both at the political level and the military level. And that expanded after the annexation of Crimea, and has continued since. I see what's been going on since 2022 as part of that pattern overall.
Right. Now, my strong guess is, John, that you know rather more about these matters than you can properly discuss on the air with me this afternoon. But we are talking about an area of military activity which, quite apart from being perhaps militarily difficult, is also, in diplomatic terms, incredibly sensitive as well. I mean, we have lost a soldier who was helping the Ukrainians in Ukraine. Any kind of operation gets us close to the point of some sort of very difficult, awkward diplomatic incident, doesn't it?
Yes, I mean, of course, Russia's always been trying to portray the UK armed forces as co-belligerents with Ukraine in the war since 2022, and I think that's obviously a lie. But Russia has issued threats to UK and other NATO personnel inside Ukraine since the invasion started. And I think, although there's been leaks about presence of UK forces and other forces in there, the government's been quite right to make sure that operational security is being maintained. And as the Prime Minister said, he could acknowledge there's a small number of troops, UK personnel in Ukraine, but not go into any detail. And when I was in Moscow, I didn't ask the question because I didn't want to know. I didn't need to know the question.
Yes.
And the answer, because in case in the future I'm on the show with John Pienaar and he asked me a difficult question. But I think we can say that Larissa's on the money, really. And I think it's not just about the medical support or perhaps support to the protection of UK diplomats and any visitors, such as Defence Secretary or Prime Minister when they go to Ukraine. It's also supporting Ukraine's sovereign right to defend itself, whether that's on land, sea and air. And I think that's probably where you should be looking.
Yeah, well, I mean, that might be, a pretty widespread assumption. We've just heard of the sad death of a British serviceman and the capture of a British military member of the armed forces. That would also be a diplomatic disaster in some ways, wouldn't it?
Yeah, but the Russians have lied about this since the beginning of the war. They've lied that British officers have been captured. They've lied about killing US and Italian generals. They've lied about hitting training sites where British personnel have been operating. So I think I've set aside the Russian spin. I mean, the UK has been quite clear that we support Ukraine's right to defend itself, and it's Ukraine's sovereign right to ask their allies and partners to help them. And I think that's what we've been doing for the last 3 years, almost 4 years now. And I think that's what Lance Corporal Hooley was doing. I mean, I think on his actual unit is not particularly of significance. I mean, we know that the 1st Battalion of the Parachute Regiment forms part of a thing called the Special Forces Support Group, which supports Special Forces. And I think the government's quite right not to confirm or deny the activities of anybody in that area to keep them safe.
All right, John Foreman, the former British Defence Attaché in Moscow and in Kyiv, thank you so much. Now, coming up, I'll get the latest from business for you from Robert Miller on the Times Business Desk. And we're going to be asking why 40% of children in Scottish schools are recorded as suffering, well, from conditions such as autism, ADHD or other mental health issues in areas of special need. It's more than double the figure in England. And as Belarus continues to float cigarette-filled balloons over Lithuania, we'll look at the true threat posed by that and other, hybrid attacks. Now, though, the news with Tom Noonan.
across the UK on DAB, online and on your smart speaker. John Pienaar at Drive on Times Radio.
It's 4:35.
Times Radio Business News.
And welcome to Robert Miller from the business desk of the Times. Hi to you, Robert.
Hello there, John.
Shall we start with the markets?
Yes, coming into the close, FTSE 100 up 21, 22 points, so we can assume positive territory there. Little less so for the FTSE 250, down about 76 points at the moment. Let's concentrate on the positive, though. It's been a mixed day, obviously, across Europe with the US Federal Reserve that we talked about yesterday, interest rate decision at 7. Topping the leaderboard, HSBC Holdings up. They're up 3.5%, and that was on a note from Bank of America because they upgraded their recommendation. Standard Chartered was another one, up nearly 2%. Then Scottish Mortgage Investment Trust, we often mention this, it's a very popular investment trust because it invests in US technology, but despite its title, it did very well. And this is on the back of the report we've got on the website at the moment. This is that SpaceX, Elon Musk's aerospace venture, might actually join the stock market next year. So they were good. So was Bailey Gifford US Growth Trust on the back of that. Not a bad day for the Magnum Ice Cream. It started secondary listing in London on Monday. It's just about back to where it started on Monday. So shares up about, up 2.5%. That's not too bad. Pearson, the education publisher, they're up about 2%. TUI, Europe's largest travel operator, they've had a good day, very strong day. Results-wise, earnings before deductions up 13%. Down on the FTSE 250, we've got the First Group. There's been a lot of chatter around the shares there because they're gradually losing their franchises to be taken over by the government. They've already lost South Western Rail, and they will shortly lose, or in time, GWR, Great Western Rail, and Avanti. But they've been awarded or preferred bidder status for the London Overground, which is the Elizabeth Line and Docklands Light Railway, could be worth up to $3 billion. So a nice bounce for their shares, up about 4.5% there. The dollar 133 at the moment is up a couple of pennies, but to the good. And oil, well, $61.60 when I came in. So that's still quite low.
Robert Miller, thank you.
Times Radio Business News.
43% of pupils in Scottish schools now have additional support needs. That's according to an official census. Teachers' leaders say that they're overwhelmed by what's been described as an explosion of cases. Officials are warning that the increase may be due to the change in recording methods and greater attention to the needs of children. Mike Corbett spent 26 years as a teacher and is a national official for NASUWT Teachers Union in Scotland. Hello to you, Mike.
Good afternoon, John.
40%, Mike, welcome, of Scottish children in special needs. That is whichever way you look at it, it's a really enormous number.
It's a huge figure, and as you touched on there, John, some of that is no doubt because we're probably better at identifying additional support needs. There have been some changes in data collection. Indeed, we're not sure that all 32 councils in Scotland collect in the same way, and there are some very broad categories, but the reality on the ground is pretty stark. I mean, I left the classroom about 4 years ago. You might get 3 or 4, kids with an additional support need in your mainstream class then. It's now 9, 10, 11 in a mainstream class of 30. So that's the reality on the ground that our members are trying to cope with.
Right. So the great disparity between the level of children in special needs in Scotland and the figure in England, which is around half, may be simply about the way that those needing help are identified.
In part, I would think, but I mean, there's no doubt that there's something of a crisis, I think, in SEND in England as well. Although the figures are different, but the impact is very similar, and we're certainly seeing, I think, quite an increase in all sorts of problems post-COVID. So we think that's had an impact as well. But, as we say, the reality is there on the ground. It's no good for our members, but it's no good for those children with additional support needs either, and the support that they actually need to get day to day. Yeah,
I mean, there has been, hasn't there, a really significant increase since the pandemic. It looks like more evidence of the massive generational impact of COVID on society.
Yes, that's right. And we've said, quite regularly that initial approach post-COVID to put additional resources, into schools and into support services seems to have disappeared. We heard that phrase education recovery quite a lot for maybe a year or 18 months, but that seems to have disappeared, as has some of that additional funding. And there's no doubt that we need that back if we're going to help out these children.
Tell me, Mike, what is it like being a teacher in a class in these sorts of circumstances when you've got a room full of children, many of them with very real needs, but needs of different characters, and the teacher's got the job of just trying to teach them all?
It stresses out our members, to be honest, because they have a kind of Hobson's choice, really, of do you spend more time differentiating and individualising things for those children with additional support needs to help them, but perhaps to the detriment of the wider class, or vice versa. Someone is losing out in the class every day in those circumstances, and that's why we really need that to be addressed properly.
Right, thank you for sharing your thoughts, Mike. That's Mike Corbett, who was a teacher in Scotland for 26 years. Now, a nationwide emergency has been declared in Lithuania after hundreds of large balloons entered the country from Belarus. The Lithuanian Prime Minister says it is a hybrid attack with more than 600 large meteorological-type balloons and 200 drones entering the country this year. I can talk now to Žygimantas Pavolinas, the Lithuanian MP. Žygimantas, welcome.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yes.
Good to have you on the programme. So the leader of Lithuania says this is an emergency. Tell us, how serious is this?
It is serious. If you remember, maybe 3 years ago, Lukashenko regime attacked us with so-called instrumentalized migration, with organized migration through our borders. We built a very strong fence, very sophisticated fence, and we pushed this migration out. So now the only way to attack us through the air, and the drones and balloons. Our capital is just 30 kilometers from the border with dictatorship in Minsk. So they are flooding us with balloons. That simply stops the international traffic. Each evening, planes cannot land. And it, of course, affects investors. It affects the confidence in the government. And I think they do it for the reason because, actually this week, tomorrow, we are voting for the defense spending that is 5.3% of our GDP, the highest in NATO. We are one of the best supporters of Ukraine, trying to fight for their freedom. So they try to humiliate, divide the government who is trying to do the right thing.
Right. And so we hear then that these balloons, hundreds of weather balloons, are disrupting air traffic. They force closures of airports. And you say it's a form of sort of hybrid warfare. I assume protests have been made. What is the, if that's the case, what sort of answer has there been from the government of Belarus?
Well, they are just humiliating us and laughing at us. What they want, because you remember the revolution that they actually crashed in 20, they want us to shake the hand of this dictatorship. So it's kind of coercion to cooperation. They don't want us to support freedom and democracy. They want us to embrace dictatorship. And to be very blunt and honest, they see some, winds from Washington, D.C. blowing where Trump administration is actually doing the same. So they say, please, Lithuanians, forget your freedom, forget your democracy, do what Trump does, embrace us, and it will be okay. But it's not okay for us.
Yes. I read that these balloons in some cases, or for all I know, all of them, are loaded with cigarettes. Are we talking about a disruptive, deliberate effect here, which is being disguised as an effort to smuggle cigarettes? Obviously not convincingly, but is that what's going on?
Well, if that would be just cigarettes, you would fly balloons not to international airports,
well, indeed.
Not to block the traffic and for us to catch those balloons. Yeah. So it is actually testing the NATO frontier, because we are NATO frontier, with some kind of new means. Yeah. Another day, it might not be cigarettes, it might be explosive, or it might be intelligence device that would spy on our troops here.
Yeah, and I guess that may well be the intimidatory plan behind all of this. What sort of defences do you have against these incursions? I mean, can you bring down the balloons? Can you shoot them down? What do you do?
And that's exactly where we have to work together, because, we are preparing for the wars of the past or maybe of the present. But as you see now in Ukraine, actually 70 or 80% of the war is done in air, by robots, by movements. And we don't have drone war. Former Lithuanian Prime Minister, my former boss and defense commissioner, is trying to move the idea that, learning from Ukrainian experience, we have to invest money not only in tanks, but into anti-drone and drone armies, because if tomorrow Russia wants to attack UK, for example, they can do it by drones, and by drones that will not be flying only, from outside the areas. They might fly through low shadow ships that are approaching Britain, or from some containers in the middle of London. And what will you actually do then?
Okay, now let me ask you while you're here. What do you make of what you've been hearing in recent days from President Trump in Washington himself, speaking in terms which sort of denote a stepping further back from the idea of collective security in Europe through NATO, and the disdain with which he talks about leaders in Europe?
Well, I would say like that. Russian incursions in Georgia and Ukraine show that it is very difficult to occupy a country by territory, by taking its territory. It's difficult. So it's much easier to occupy a country politically. And what's happening right now, when I see Witkoff more or less citing the wishful list of President Putin, I think some of advices in the White House are taken by Russians. And thanks God we have some adults in the room like Rubio and others who are trying to, together with Europeans, to prove to those real estate builders that, well, it's not only Russian money that you can build the peace. It's also about values, about democracy, about international law, about international system that our grandfathers built after the Second World War. I would say some Trump advisors are trying to do something that, some Germans and French, they were doing 2 decades ago. Merkel learned it hard way. You don't shake the hands of Russians. And I will actually cite the Tony Blair, who said to me and my president before stepping down, it was the biggest mistake I made when I invited Russians to G8. I thought I will civilize them. No, they come to destroy our clubs from inside. So yes, we should learn from the history.
Yes, and when you look around Europe and you see the United States stepping back from its historic role as a supporter of security in Europe, do you think Europe's leaders are doing enough and doing it quickly enough to fill the space? There is talk now of a really significant payment to Ukraine, isn't there, from the European Union and from Britain. Do you need to see that and a lot more?
Some of us do, but not all. I would say Nordic, Baltic, and Polish and German nations, they do, because we really raise money for defense. Unfortunately, I was just in your studio in London, and I'm a bit disappointed with my British friends who are raising defense just to 2.5. To be honest, I was with Finnish colleague whose army is 10 times bigger than of British. So it's a joke. We have to wake up. We have to wake up in London as well, because if some of Trump advisors go mad and go a bit pro-Russian, it's time for us to wake up. We can still do it. We are 20 times richer than Russians. So let's do it together. I know that we have some negotiations with British friends on participation in so-called SAFE program. Let's finish those talks. Let's unite our defense with Ukrainians, because honestly, Ukrainians are the strongest army that we have in Europe today, much stronger than British armies. So let's unite the forces, and maybe we will not have to call each time to Washington, D.C.
Okay, time for Europe to wake up, and I'm going to be picking up on that theme of discussion in the next hour of the programme. For now, Žygimantas Pavilionis of Lithuania, an MP there. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Now, coming up after 5, I'm going to be speaking, as promised, to the renowned historian Anthony Beevor. He believes President Trump has placed the democratic world in very real peril. Interested to hear what he has to say. I've also going to get the other side of the debate from one of the president's most ardent supporters. That's his former ambassador to Denmark. And I'll get you up to date with the union or blossoming political friendship between Nigel Farage and the man who's a rising star of the French far right, Jordan Bardella. And what was the first man-made fire in this ever recorded or discovered? It's in Suffolk, and I'll tell you more a bit later on. It is now 4:51. I'm John Pienaar on Times Radio Drive.
Across the UK, on DAB, online and on your smart speaker. John Pienaar at Drive on Times Radio.
Now, tomorrow, some of your favourite Times and Times Radio journalists are going to be manning the phones to receive your donations to the Christmas appeal. There'll be Matthew Syed, Fraser Nelson, Martin Samuel, Hadley Freeman, and many, many more. So do not miss the chance to chat to one of us and show your support for the chosen charity. Just call 0207 782 5555, or you can head to thetimes.com/Christmas appeal to find out more and donate. I'm going to be there too, so if you fancy a chat, do please give us a bell. As of tomorrow, London's Alexandra Palace will again be the home of a sporting festive staple, the PDC World Darts Championship. From the back rooms of British pubs, darts is now a global sporting behemoth, and this year's competition is going to be the biggest yet. The teen sensation Luke Littler is seeking to retain his crown, and Owen Slott, Times chief sports writer, is going to be all over it. Hello to you, Owen.
Hiya.
Hi, Owen. Welcome. It's not overdoing it to say that darts is now huge.
No, it's not. It's extraordinary the way it's got to this point. The pub sport, as you said, has become sort of an event that's part entertainment, sort of part festive staple, and part very high level, skillful sport, which is being taken onto a new level by the young Luke Littler, who you just mentioned.
Yeah, I do want to hear more about Luke Littler, but the appeal of darts to watch it and listen. You're listening and watching a sport which just conjures an image of a lot of people together having an outrageously good time, watching a game they love to watch, and just doing so over the odd pint, sometimes more than the odd pint.
Well, yes, more than the odd pint. It's unique in one particular way, I think, John, in that most of the time when people go to watch professional sport, they'll go with a team in mind, who they're supporting, who they're cheering for. People go to the darts to enjoy the occasion. There's little partisan kind of behaviour. People obviously have their favourites. Luke Littler's a massive favourite to many people. But it's the event and being there and the sort of the festive joy of it, if you like. But the way that darts is attended throughout the year at smaller events has the same kind of feel.
Yeah.
It's we want to be there, we want to enjoy it, we want to dress up in preposterous fancy dress. I mean, the amount of fancy dress is astonishing, and the effort that goes into it. I mean, it is hilarious.
Yeah, that's what it is. Enormous fun to watch. I don't know if everyone feels exactly the same way. It's so associated with, getting in there, a crowd, singing and chanting, as I say, knocking back a good few beers and dressing up in a silly way. Do any people think that is a downside to them? Would they like to be a bit more serious and a bit less alcoholic?
Well, I've gone a bit quiet there because I
can't even conceive of anyone having that view.
I think the point, John, is that normally with the amount of alcohol being consumed at a big public event, particularly a big sporting public event, that there might be concerns for security or fights or arrests.
Yeah.
But I've been there a number of years. The security never looks remotely oppressive. I'm not aware of the arrest count being even existing. It must do, but I'm not really aware of it. That it's something that people enjoy together. One of the interesting things, so they encourage fancy dress. They love the fancy dress. The only thing you're not allowed to wear is a football shirt. The reason being that encourages a kind of partisanship.
Sure.
I'm with this gang, you might be with that gang, therefore we might be against each other. That is the only thing that they won't allow you to wear.
Right. So tell me a bit about the players. You say darts to anyone now, they're probably going to think of Luke Little, because he's just grabbed the game, hasn't he, by the ears, and he's dragging it along. He's so young and just so astonishingly good at what he does.
Yeah. So he reached the final when he was 16 and lost, and that was an incredible story. And it was sort of like, we can't believe this kid has done it. Then last year, age 17, he won the final. Again, you can't believe he's done it. And this year at age 18, he's now the number one in the world, and he's the clear favourite to win. The incredible thing about him, John, is the fact that he seems to be that story where you think you know how it's going to end. All the success, all the wealth, coming to someone so young, so early. You think that's going to go wrong in the end, but he seems to handle it incredibly well.
Yeah.
He gets better and better. Or he has got better and better the last 2 years. His dominance has grown, and on the back of that, because he's a relatable young kid and he's massive on social media, which is obviously good for the expansion of the sport. It means that the numbers have grown, new audiences have been attracted, and his own story has encouraged a lot of people, inspired a lot of people, and inspired a lot of kids to try and follow in that path.
Yeah, I was watching a Man United game on telly the other day, and there was a cutaway. The camera's cutaway to Luke Littler in the crowd. They normally only do that for mega celebrities, and that's what he is in the northwest of the country, a mega celebrity. So it looks like it's going to be a good time watching the darts. Anyone else you want to mention? Chuck into the pot before we part.
Well, when he was beaten 2 years ago, the darts world was beginning to be a bit of dominance established by another Luke Humphreys, now 30 years old, from Reading. It seemed to be like his time. His time didn't last very long because Luke Littler barged him aside. So, but he's still firmly the number 2 in the world and is his main threat. A couple of Dutchman would be up there challenging as well. Michael van Gerwen, who's won 3 times before, has fallen away a little bit.
Yeah.
And another Dutchman, Jan van Veen, who's who I'd say probably 4th favourite. So those would be the main people to look out for.
Okay, we do like a bit of rivalry. Any game needs a bit of that. Owen Slot, Times Chief Sports Writer, thank you. And you can stay up to date with all of the 127 matches on TalkSport.
Across the UK, on DAB digital radio, online and on your smart speaker. This is Times Radio, the voice of the Times.
It is 5 o'clock. I'm John Pienaar on Times Radio. Here are the headlines. Dozens of European justice ministers have agreed the ECHR must be reformed in order to deal with immigration. And the Prime Minister has spoken to Donald Trump this afternoon about Ukraine, along with the French and German leaders. Coming up, I'm going to be joined by Sir Anthony Beevor to discuss President Trump's latest broadside against Europe. And I'll be talking about the transatlantic alliance with one of the president's fiercest allies too. And we're going to go inside the tightening alliance between Nigel Farage and Marine Le Pen's protégé, Jordan Bardella.
This is Times Radio.
And now the news with Tom Noonan.
Good afternoon, John. Thank you.
Across the UK, on DAB digital radio, on the free Times Radio app, online and on your smart speaker. Quality journalism, analysis and opinion that speaks for itself. John Pienaar at Drive on Times Radio.
It is good to have your company on Drive on Times Radio. I'm John Pienaar. Europe is on the brink of war, and Britain is more vulnerable than we've been at any time since the start of World War II in 1939. Now that is a pretty alarming view, don't you think? And coming from any commentator or analyst, only it's not just the view of any analyst. They're the thoughts of Sir Anthony Beevor, one of the country's most highly regarded military historians and a best-selling author. Beevor's views on the perilous state of the Western Alliance and the danger of it breaking apart as a consequence of what he sees as President Trump's dangerous and self-harming rewriting of US foreign policy. Well, his thoughts are bone-chilling. Professor Beevor is going to be joining us in just a moment. And so will one of President Trump's most dedicated followers, Carla Sands, who's a former US ambassador to Denmark. Both very welcome to the programme. As, of course, are you, or what would be the point? Do join in the conversation. Send me a text, 87222, start with the word Times, or a tweet to @TimesRadio. I'm going to start by saying good afternoon to Professor Sir Anthony Beevor. Good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon, John.
It's very good to have you here. Now, I've been reading your article in the Engelsberg Ideas journal, which is described as a sort of policy thinkers journal, and you set out some of your views there that the West and the democratic world are now in peril, and our European leaders have been slow and complacent about the danger that we are in. It seems that if we're not frightened by thoughts like that, we really ought to be. Tell me more.
Well, I think we should be. I've just been in Norway, and when one talks to, as I did, to their chief of their defence staff and so forth, they are taking the threat from Russia very seriously indeed. And yet in this country, we have the budget, and there's hardly a penny going towards restoring the ammunition which has been given to Ukraine. And as a result, the British Army is not in a position to fight for, let's face it, probably much more than a week or 10 days.
Yes.
So we are in a very vulnerable position indeed.
And it's your view then that President Trump is, and this is the phrase that you use, strong-arming Ukraine towards surrender. And not only that, but doing so with the aim of dividing the spoils of war. You call that thug diplomacy. This is strong language, Sir Anthony.
Yes, it is. And I'm certainly not alone in using it. I mean, numerous commentators in the United States have been pointing out how the way that the negotiations, as they're called, are being conducted not by diplomats, not by statesmen, but by businessmen, by Witkoff and Kuchner, and Dmitriev on the other side, who's the head of the Russian Sovereign Fund. So, I mean, what were they doing? Aren't they in fact, actually, dividing up the spoils of war, not looking for a just peace, with Ukraine as the victim?
Yeah, and the phrase thug diplomacy, I take that to mean, well, just bald coercion with the aim of gain on the part of America, and some suggest President Trump himself.
Well, the Chinese call it wolf diplomacy. Thug diplomacy, I'm afraid, when you're strong-arming somebody into a country, a sovereign country, into surrendering to an aggressor. Who has actually invaded, attacked, and destroyed a large part of that particular country. Yes, I do think that's thug diplomacy.
Give me your thoughts then on the state of the Western alliance. We heard President Trump in an interview the other day. We read the global policy document at the weekend, and we're talking about now the United States administration openly, you describe, calling for regime change in Europe, utterly disdainful of European leaders and calling for them to be challenged and presumably be beaten by popular right-wing political rivals.
Well, indeed. I mean, this is made very, very clear in the Trump's national security document. It doesn't pull any punches in that particular way, and yet at the same time it says that we should be respectful of other people's cultures and policy and all the rest of it. But it is actually saying that revealing the hatred for the European Union, which Trump has, which he regards as a deliberate affront to the United States, and also basically saying that all of the present administrations or whatever, or governments in this country, which have been legally elected, should be replaced by more favourable, i.e. populist and extreme right parties instead.
How, in your view then, Professor, should the leaders of Europe who've been attacked in this way by the president, how should they respond to that? How should they deal with what is still a very important trading partner and in many ways an ally?
Well, indeed. I mean, I think on the whole they've been responding in the only way that they could. There is no point having, say, a shouting match with Trump when he's certainly not going to listen. It's a question of trying to, if you like, handle his narcissism as best you can in the circumstances, and continue, at least keep the United States within the NATO alliance. I mean, at one moment, one doesn't know whether the United States is actually part of the NATO alliance, with some of the instructions being issued by the Department of War, as it's now called. And one doesn't know to what degree the United States realizes quite how much United States power is being undermined, in fact, by this fragmentation of alliances.
Yeah.
And, you know, Trump actually believes that his great advantage is in divide and rule, in fragmentation. But in fact, I think that it is the worst thing that could happen, actually, for the security of the United States. He believes in going back to that sort of pre-war idea of isolationism, the idea of the Golden Dome, which will protect the United States and the whole of that hemisphere. And it is true, he is genuinely concerned about nuclear warfare. But you would have thought that the United States can't exist entirely on its own in a bubble in this particular way. And it does need allies. We all need allies. And we need them, in fact, to stabilize the world rather than to make it even more dangerous.
Yeah, I mean, and when you write in your article that we're probably in a more vulnerable position than we were in 1939, that is as dark as it gets. I mean, I've read your books on World War II, which were, I thought, just outstanding. And we were talking about 1939, at the outset of World War II, when we were in a position of facing an enemy who could conceivably have beaten us, have won that war, had it not been for America, the transatlantic ally,
absolutely
coming to our help.
But one has to remember that even the much maligned Chamberlain realized by 1937 that a huge amount of investment had to be made in our defences. This is not happening. It hasn't happened. I mean, both the Conservative government, but even more the present government, are responsible. The first duty of any government is the defence of the country.
Yes.
And we are not in a position to defend ourselves. And we're already in a form of grey zone warfare. So to starve defence, and in fact in many cases even reduce the budgets for defence at this particular moment is madness.
Professor Sir Anthony Beevor, it was an enormous pleasure to talk to you. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Sean.
Now, in a moment, I'll be talking to a supporter, a great supporter of President Trump. Before that, though, let me just share this with you, a statement from the British Medical Association, which have been planning to hold strikes in the next few weeks. It says, the government has put forward an offer on ending the jobs crisis for doctors in England. The BMA will consult resident doctor members in England on whether this offer will be sufficient to call off the next period of strikes. More on that a little later on. Now, though, let me welcome Carla Sands, the former American ambassador to Denmark. Hello, Carla. Welcome back to the programme.
Hi, John. It's great to be with you.
You're always welcome. Now, speaking in Rome, you would have, I'm sure, have seen this. Pope Leo launched a pretty sharp rebuke at President Trump and the U.S. administration, accusing President Trump of attempting to break apart the historic transatlantic alliance, which he clearly felt would be absolutely the wrong thing to do. And you heard Professor Beaver, who's I know you know, he's a respected historian, and he was talking about the very same thing. What do you say to both of those pretty strident critics?
Well, so one is there's a great misunderstanding about President Trump's national security strategy. He's attempting to make the UK and the EU stronger allies, credible defense, secure borders, controlled immigration, strong economies, abundant and affordable energy, protection of the rule of law, and your beautiful cultures. And that goes for all of our allies. That is what President Trump's document, in my opinion, says. I don't speak for him, but I will just say, historically, and we love the Pope, right? We have many Catholic friends, but historically, the Catholic Church, the Catholic charities have benefited to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars with uncontrolled immigration. They get money for every immigrant. They help process and move the immigrants around, house them. So this is a business case for the Pope. And unfortunately, he is a globalist and he believes in uncontrolled immigration. But like the document said, the national security strategy that was just released last week, if Europe doesn't control its borders and its immigration, the fact is it will become a Muslim majority bloc for many of the countries. And President Trump and his team fear that they could choose to leave NATO as we have a crashing economy in some of the countries because of regulations and because of the demographics change.
Okay, now Carla, you won't need me to tell you that a great many commentators, respectable commentators of huge experience and analytical power, just don't accept a word of what you say. Your interpretation of what the president's true feeling here is. His words in that Politico interview the other day were utterly disdainful of Europe. So was the national security strategy. I mean, let me just ask.
I disagree completely with your statement.
No, well, what I say I think is undeniable because that is the view of commentators.
We love the UK. John, if I may,
Do, please.
Our laws, our culture come from Europe and the UK, right? It's Greece, it's ancient Rome, it's to Israel, it's to the UK. Our freedom of speech, much of our constitution really come from the laws from the UK. And many of us, our ancestors come from the UK and from the EU. We love you all. We want you to succeed. And we're afraid that we're losing our allies and friends to totalitarian government, to globalist agendas, to a change in immigration and a loss of your freedoms and your economic might.
Yeah, and I don't dispute for a moment that there's an enormous amount of fellow feeling among Americans towards the people and the cultures of Europe, including, of course, the United Kingdom.
That's right.
But when I put this to you for the sake of the discussion. And when I look at the strategy document, which talks about encouraging patriotic parties, which of course we all understand means those populist parties of the right, anti-migrant parties like the AfD in Germany, for example. That's where J.D. Vance, the vice president, went personally on a recent visit to Europe. That's described by Anthony Beaver in his article, among others, as arguing for regime change. And that will not and has not been taken, colour, as a mark of American respect for them or their democracies or them as allies.
So I hear what you're saying, but what we've watched from across the pond is that the center right and left parties in the UK especially, but also in some cases in the EU, have had the same globalist agenda. They've signed on to the net zero agenda and have decimated their industrial base. Look at Germany, where they're now building manufacturing facilities in China using Russian energy. This is terrifying. And look at the fact that Europe has paid more to Russia for energy during the Ukraine war than they've paid to support Ukraine in the war. all of this is not good, but the globalist agenda of uncontrolled migration and bad energy policies that lead to a hollowing out of the industrial base in almost all the countries. This is causing suicide of Europe, and it may be UK, and we're watching it. We're watching it and saying, please course correct quickly before it's too late.
Okay. I just want to pick up on the point about cultural change, which you say is taking place to the detriment of this country, of my country. In the United Kingdom, for example, can I just put it to you, are you aware of the proportion of people of this country who are of Muslim origin? What proportion do you imagine that is?
So I looked at the demographics of London, and I saw how in the 60s, London was almost 100% native-born, people from England.
Well, Carla, if you'll forgive me, let me just, for the purpose of the conversation,
maybe less than 30% of native-born great Britons living in London now compared to then, and it's because of the uncontrolled immigration.
Okay,
and
let me then tell you, if I may,
they're putting male immigrants into small towns and hamlets across the UK. When I see what's happening, for instance, the rape gangs of the Pakistani rape gangs of these girls from Rochdale and those surrounding areas for the last 30, 40 years that have been covered up because the government wanted their votes and they didn't want to be called racist. So they didn't protect their own citizens.
I hear your argument. And that's
one job of any government is to protect the citizens of their jurisdiction. And the UK has failed.
Right. Okay, I hear your arguments and I'm glad to hear them because that's why you're invited on, why you are welcome. But are you aware, Carla, that the proportion of Muslims in the British population is 6.5%? Are you further aware that in the case of France, the figure is 10%? Now, many would say that scarcely looks like a takeover or like the erasure of a host country.
They have 5 children to 1 or 2 for every Britainer, for instance. And if you look at the use of
6.5%, Carla, 6.5% can't be called a takeover.
No, I looked at the demographics and the fact of incomes. And if you bring an American or someone from the EU into your country, they're a net benefit of hundreds of thousands of dollars over their lifetime. If you bring someone in from Africa or North Africa, they cost your government in social services between $500,000 and $1 million over their lifetime. They're a net negative for your country. This is just a fact. Why don't you bring in people that will grow the economy of the UK? Change the regulations and build up your economy so that you're thriving and can afford to have a credible defense and have cheap and abundant energy for your people so they can afford to heat their homes in the winter.
Okay, now when I look at public opinion in this country through opinion polls, which is the only vaguely reliable measure.
And we love our Muslim friends. I'm not denigrating any religious group. I'm saying that what Europe and the UK are doing is civilizational suicide through your regulations and your immigration policies.
Okay, and we hear your point clearly, but you've heard my questions and so have others, and they'll make up their own mind in listening to this discussion. When it comes to security, as I suggest to you, there are many commentators who do not accept that President Trump's view of the alliance is motivated by a benign view of Europe and friendship towards his European allies. Let me ask you in this way then. Do you think we should all believe here in Europe that the United States will and would honour its obligations as a NATO partner and defend any NATO member that would be attacked by Vladimir Putin's Russia? Because that is the essence of Article 5 of the NATO Treaty. Could we trust America to do that, do you think?
So, John, it's a really great question. Thank you. So if we look at the NATO Charter and then we look at what it calls for, Article 3 in the NATO Charter says that every NATO member ally will have a credible defense. And just like your prior guest talked about, UK doesn't have a credible defense. You can't defend your own territory, but that's required in Article 3 before you get to Article 5, which is then your allies come to your defense. What happened is we all took that peace dividend after the Berlin Wall fell, and every country around in the NATO alliance and countries that were future members of the NATO alliance, they just stopped spending on defense. Some countries went to less than 1%, no credible defense. And so we're now all rebuilding. We need more munitions. We need more industrial base and manufacturing of weapons of war. There's no question. But of course, Europe is much stronger than Russia. Europe and the NATO alliance both can absolutely withstand Russia, which is about the economy of Texas. Europe is a powerful bloc. It has great capabilities. It needs more, but there's certainly no threat to Europe from Russia because the United States is your NATO ally. Putin, I do not believe, will attack Russia. And I'm sure,
Carla, I'm sure you are very well aware.
The mischief that he does, but I'm actually talking about an overt attack. That would be the end of Russia as we know it.
Look, I'm sure you're aware there is an active, clear and present threat to Europe, Western Europe, from Russia. I was having a conversation.
China is the clear and present threat.
Allow me to put the question. A moment ago, I spoke to a politician in Lithuania who was telling us about balloons, meteorological balloons being flown across the border, and they have the effect of disrupting air traffic. They close airports. It's more of the grey warfare. We have had so much of the kind, cyber attacks. We've had vital undersea cables cut by Russian military warships. Every moment there's another test. NATO airspace is invaded by Russian aircraft. Constant provocation, constant threat. And we've just heard Anthony Beaver saying that we're in more peril in this continent than we've been since 1939. Surely we can and we do and we must see Russia as a potential dangerous adversary. And the worry is that America is not there. Carla, do finally give me your thoughts on this, that if it came to conflict, which it very well may, we in the continent of Europe could not count on America to honour Article 5 of the NATO Treaty in the way that Europe came to the support of America after 9/11.
Well, certainly you've heard President Trump say that the NATO alliance is ironclad, but we do need our allies to do more. I will say that the balloons going over the United States just a few years ago, they were Chinese balloons. China is the great threat to our civilizations. Russia is definitely annoying, but we would actually like to see better relations with Russia and not have them aligned with China. We think that is very devastating because China has such a powerful military. The fact is that we're losing so many young men on the field in Ukraine. That war must end. But I just want to raise with you for one moment this digital services agreement, this DSA that the EU has now fined Elon Musk and Twitter X because he won't censor speech. This is the greatest threat to our alliance, I think, is the fact that Europe is conducting gray zone warfare on the United States because we have freedom of speech in our country, like the UK used to have, and we protect our First Amendment, and we will not allow Europe to attack the United States and our rule of law and attempt to rule the U.S. from Brussels. That is unacceptable.
Yeah.
That's a very big deal to us.
Okay, you wouldn't be surprised to hear me say that last interpretation of events would be hotly disputed by so many on this side of the Atlantic. But for now, we have to close because time presses. Carla Sands, thank you so much for joining us.
Great to be with you, John.
Now, coming up on the programme, we're going to go inside Ukraine's audacious drone attack on Russia. You might remember that. It smashed into the Russian bomber command. It was such an extraordinary undercover operation. We're going to hear what went on inside that operation. And the first man-made fire seems to have been discovered in Suffolk. Next, why Nigel Farage and the French far-right leader Jordan Bardella have been getting on so very well. It's 5:27. I'm John Pienaar on Times Radio Drive.
across the UK, on DAB, online and on your smart speaker. John Pienaar at Drive on Times Radio.
The British Medical Association says that the government made a fresh pay offer to resident doctors, which it will now show to its members. Times Radio understands the Health Secretary will lay out information on the offer in the House of Commons this evening. There is hope that it might just end the planned strike over Christmas. Let's talk to Eleanor Hayward, Health Editor for The Times. Hello, Eleanor.
Hi.
What can you tell us about this? There has been a statement, I know, from the BMA. Can I ask you, first of all, are we looking at an improved pay offer, or is it about those other surrounding conditions?
Yeah, there's nothing about pay in this offer. It's purely about the jobs element and other kind of working conditions, things like that.
Okay, and can you take us through the nature of those fresh offers then?
Yeah, so there's a few different elements to it. One of them is to pass new emergency legislation that would ensure that British medical graduates get priority for jobs over doctors from overseas, which have been a key ask of the BMA. And there's also a promise to increase the number of jobs in the NHS, the number of specialty training posts, to 4,000 over the next 3 years, by 4,000 in the next 3 years. And also pledges to pay for the exam fees that doctors have to do throughout their careers.
Right, so now the BMA puts this out to its membership, and there's no regulation?
They've not specifically said vote for it, don't vote for it, but the quote issued on the press release is not particularly positive about the offer. It says it doesn't address pay, which is the key.
Right, okay.
The key element of there.
All right, Eleanor, thank you so much. Eleanor Hayward, the Health Editor at The Times. Now, coming up after 6, Pienaar and Friends. We're going to be chatting and we're going to be hearing from Henry Hill from Conservative Home and the Mirror's Mikey Smith. And before that, an astonishing story of espionage, drones and deceit behind Ukraine's audacious drone attack deep inside Russia. Now, though, 5:31, the news with Tom New.
across the UK, on DAB, online and on your smart speaker. John Pienaar at Drive on Times Radio.
Now, details of what was the boldest covert operation of the war in Ukraine have been revealed by the Wall Street Journal. They tell us about a real-life Trojan horse plot, smuggling more than 100 attack drones into Russia, hidden inside prefab cabins. Operation Spiderweb, as it was called, took 18 months of planning, of subterfuge, and, in the end, a touch of luck. James Marson is the Wall Street Journal's Ukraine bureau chief and has been writing about this. James, welcome to you.
Hi, John.
James, I mean, I so enjoyed reading your piece. I mean, the operation was beyond imagination. The story that you tell is gripping, and the outcome was astonishing in its level of success.
Yes, it was quite amazing how the Ukrainians were able to achieve this. I think it's quite a typical success story for Ukraine. That is something that we've seen throughout the war, is how they've been able to use technology, subterfuge, and just some quite audacious operations in order to fight what is a David versus Goliath battle against the Russians. We've seen them do incredible things like blowing up Russia's Kerch Bridge to Crimea with a truck bomb, killing a Russian general with an exploding scooter. And this was quite simply the most ambitious operation that they've tried to execute yet, and they managed to pull it off.
And using prefabricated cabins loaded onto the back of lorries, and those cabins loaded up with attack drones ready to be flown out of there, from as the roof is remotely rolled back. It's like I know this is such a trite analogy and it's so cliched, but it's like the most extraordinary Hollywood movie. I mean, so much could have gone wrong at almost any stage.
That's right. I mean, the challenge that Ukrainians faced is that these Russian planes that were flinging missiles towards Ukrainian cities, and they're hard to shoot out of the sky. They were out of the range of many of the Ukrainian missile systems. The Ukrainian missile systems didn't have enough missiles to try to shoot them down. So Ukraine had to find a way to get some attack methods inside Russia in order to try and take these aircraft out while they were on the ground. The way that they did it was by using a Ukrainian couple who were living in the city of Chelyabinsk. And what they did was they smuggled these drones into Russia. They smuggled the prefabricated cabins into Russia. The couple, one of whom used to be a DJ in Kiev, and the other of whom was working as a tattoo artist in Chelyabinsk. They were quite easily able to blend in with the locals. They spoke the fluent Russian, as many Ukrainians do. They even had Russian passports. And so they were able to put together these drones, put together the prefabricated houses. They then hired truck drivers as part of what seemed to be a normal kind of delivery of these prefabricated homes across Russia. They then stopped pretty close to these Russian airports, and the drones were released. And the drone pilots who were sitting in an operations center in Kiev then took charge of the drones and sent them smashing into Russian airplanes on the ground.
Yeah, a highly skilled set of drone operators sitting there in Kiev, sending in to the destruction of these aircraft weapons the size of a dinner plate, each carrying a couple of pounds of explosive. And look at the damage they did, and look at the success it was as it were a PR coup, quite apart from a military strike. And you think, don't you, about the people on the ground. That couple, the Ukrainian couple, he's managing the transport. She's a tattoo artist. Have they been discovered? What would have been done to them makes the blood run cold.
It really does. And I think there was one moment when this really came home to the couple, Artem Timofeyev and Katerina Timofeyeva. They got a phone call from one of the drivers a few days before the operation was supposed to go live. The roof had slid off one of these cabins on the back of his truck, and he'd spotted these drones. And he called up and said, what on earth's going on? There seem to be drones inside this house. And Timofeyev feigned ignorance and then asked his security service handlers in Kiev what to do. And they made up an explanation which sounded just about plausible to the driver. They said, these are cabins, they're hunting lodges, and the drones are going to be used to track animals across the large areas. and the driver bought it, closed the lid, and drove onward. And that was a moment when, if they'd been discovered, the Timofeyevs at that point was still in Russia, and there could have obviously been terrible consequences for them.
And you conjure the scenes in that sort of drone control room as the live picture feed is coming in of the bombers being struck, some of them utterly destroyed, some of them just placed beyond use, explosion after explosion, and the cheering in that room. You can almost feel the elation of an amazing operation having run successfully.
Well, the people who are carrying this out are guys who were pulled off the front lines. They were used to being right in the thick of the battle. And suddenly they were given this opportunity to have an impact hundreds, thousands of miles behind the front lines, but have an outsized impact by targeting these very dangerous bombers, which the Russians were using to target cities across the country. So I think it gave them a sense of real elation to have such a big effect with something that was, wasn't a particularly expensive. Yes, it was a highly complex operation, but it's not something that was incredibly expensive to put together.
Yeah, and like all the best stories of this kind in fiction, the original impetus for getting it going came from President Zelensky himself. He's saying, we've got to hit these bombers. They're the bit that's hurting us.
Well, that's what we've seen time and again throughout the conflict, is that President Zelensky has said, here's the problem, find me a solution. And the security service of Ukraine has repeatedly done that. They invented naval drones, which have subdued the Russian Black Sea fleet in the Black Sea by using these drones or unmanned seacraft. So time and again, Zelensky has come and asked General Malyuk, the head of the security service of Ukraine, to find a solution to deal with this bigger and dangerous enemy of Russia.
Yeah.
And he's come up with these ingenious ways to do it along with his team.
Well, and is there a wider lesson and a wider source of encouragement here, James? Because Ukraine fights on so outgunned, so outmanned on the front line, it needs an edge somewhere, and it has ingenuity, it has an ability to make a lot out of very little, and this is the best example you can imagine.
I think there absolutely is a bigger lesson here, John, and that is that we've seen repeatedly since the Russian tanks were right on the edge of Kiev, and we saw Ukrainian civilians come out to defend alongside the army in really ingenious ways using drones. It's been 4 years now, and Ukraine still comes up with ways to stop the Russians, even as Western support is kind of waning. And clearly, as Ukraine says, the more support that the West can give to Ukraine, the more they are able to hold off the Russians.
Right. I mean, really terrific piece in the Wall Street Journal, James. Thank you. That's James Marsden.
Thanks very much.
The bureau chief in Ukraine for the Wall Street Journal. Now, scientists in East Anglia, a rather calmer story. Scientists in East Anglia have discovered what they believe to be the earliest evidence of humans making fire. The discovery dates back 400,000 years. And the Times Science and Religious Affairs correspondent Kaya Burgess has been writing about it all, and he joins me here in the studio. Hi, Kaya.
Hello.
Tell me about this discovery.
Well, the fascinating thing is when you read a lot of scientific papers, and they'll often say, oh, this thing took place a little bit earlier than we previously thought, and it maybe moves the date back from 5,000 years ago to 5,100 years ago. This moves the date back for humans deliberately making fire from 50,000 years ago, 350,000 years before that, to 400,000 years ago. I mean, it's an absolutely astronomical leap in time. And perhaps being a bit sort of nationalist about it, but it's in Britain. It's very exciting. We don't always get these huge moments. You think of the cradle of humanity, and these sorts of discoveries will be in East Africa or the Middle East, but this was Stone Age Neanderthals living in Suffolk, as it is now. And the first evidence we have, or oldest evidence we have, of deliberate making from scratch of fire.
Right. I mean, I'm just trying to imagine the real significance of all of this. If there's a fire, one imagines someone sitting at that fire, warming themselves, keeping warm. If it's a fire, you imagine maybe more than one person there, which gets you into the area of social connections. Is that what we're talking about? First, earliest evidence of society, of a human or pre-human, whatever we're talking about, society.
I mean, the archaeologists behind this, they're very, very distinguished, long careers, sort of 40 plus year careers, and they say this is the most exciting thing they've ever found. And you're completely right on that front, in that there was an amazing discovery a while ago of these footprints from 800,000 years ago on the Norfolk coast, which showed an adult and a child walking together. And it just suddenly is very relatable. You can just see it's probably a parent and a child just
and this was
walking
how long
together.
ago?
That was 800,000 years ago.
Right.
And then fire is so important in human history. Obviously, heat and light. Britain probably could not have been populated. It was so cold if humans couldn't make fire wherever they wanted. But it was also a social thing, people gathering round the campfire, something probably most people have done at some point. And it creates quite a poignant image of a group of people sitting around, cooking, sharing stories, who knows, but that huge part of our evolution.
The imagination starts to run right. If you put together those two bits of evidence, 800,000 years ago in the Arctic, a parent walking alongside, no doubt, looking after and protecting a child. Now you've got a fire, which means you've got a fireplace. But all we need now is evidence of Christmas carols around
an armchair, maybe,
and an armchair, portrait on the wall. Who knows? I mean, more seriously, we're then also presumably talking about, I say presumably, are we? And I guess the answer is we don't know. Talking about cooking, we're talking about heating food as well as tearing it off the leg of a mammoth or whatever it is.
Well, exactly. I mean, humans had been using fire for a long time, but they had to find that fire. It had to be a lightning strike or a wildfire that they opportunistically took a sort of flaming branch from. And so it might have been a treat to have a bit of warmth and light, or to be able to cook your mammoth leg, but it would not have been a common thing. But once they developed the ability to regularly cook, it sort of released a lot more nutrition and energy from their food, which meant they got a lot more nutrition, a lot more kind of calories. They were healthier, which helped them develop bigger brains. Clearly, gathering around the campfire, light, heat. Britain had been populated, and then basically I think everyone in Britain was wiped out about 450,000 years ago by an ice age. And then when that ice retreated, there was still a land bridge between Britain and Europe, and people came back to Britain, bringing with them what was described as basically fire starting kits. And the sort of smoking gun, if you'll pardon the pun, at this site was, archaeologists find sign of fire in old human settlements quite a lot, but what was that fire? Was it a wildfire? Was it a lightning strike? Was it a chance thing? How do we know they made it deliberately? And they found iron pyrite, often known as fool's gold, which is the perfect thing for striking sparks. And that's what taught them that this was fire being deliberately made. You can't find this mineral locally, so they've brought it with them as their little kind of fire lighting kit.
So we don't just have society, we've got tool using society.
Yes.
I think we do know this, don't we? What early humans looked like.
So these were quite early Neanderthals. So our species, Homo sapiens, at this point was still just emerging in East Africa, whereas Europe, all humans in Europe, most humans at least in Europe at this time, would have been of the Neanderthal kind of lineage. But we know that our species would have met, interbred, shared knowledge at various points in our history as well.
Right, I don't want to take away from the sort of sense of patriotic achievement. I'm as jingoistic as anyone, believe me, but I presume this was going on all over the world.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I did
and
say,
maybe even 405,000 years ago.
Yeah, exactly. No one's saying, "Oh, look, Prometheus was British." Who knew? No, exactly. I mean, I did say to them, do you assume that this has been brought in? They said yes, people will probably have developed this elsewhere and come into Britain with it after this ice age receded. At some point or other, maybe another site even further back will be found. So we can't sort of add it to railways as the Brits invented fire. Can't go quite that far. But just it being on British soil is really fascinating. A lot of evidence, archaeological evidence further north in England was sort of obliterated by later ice ages.
Yeah.
But this pocket of East Anglia has certain geological features after the ice receded that preserve this kind of stuff really, really well. And you can often tell how giddy with excitement the scientists are, because sometimes as a journalist you sort of you want to get them excited about something, and they're the ones saying no, this it's an incremental change. We knew most of this before. This time they were just like, this is amazing, this is fast. I've been doing this stuff for 45 years and this is the most exciting thing I've ever found.
I love that story. Kai Burgess, thank you. Now, coming up, Pienaar and Friends. Henry Hill, as I say, from the Conservative Home, and the Mirror's Mikey Smith. And what if you would like, maybe you've got one, a pair of glasses powered by artificial intelligence. I'm going to talk to someone who's tried them out. It's 5:48. I'm John Pienaar on Drive.
Across the UK, on DAB, online and on your smart speaker. John Pienaar at Drive on Times Radio.
Now, Tracy, our listener, writes in from Cambridgeshire about the story of the earliest example of man-made fire being discovered in Suffolk, and says, when little, my late mother lived in Barnham, Suffolk, and I believe she played in the disused clay pit there. Hope she's looking down and feeling very proud of her sweet little village. She always said it was a very special place. This is a slightly different tone from Matt, who says Suffolk might have invented fire 400,000 years ago, but they haven't done much of note since. And now Matt explains that he's a Norfolk boy. Now, tomorrow there is a special edition for you of How to Win an Election. The former Deputy Prime Minister and Liberal Democrat leader Nick Clegg is joining Hugo Rifkin, so do not miss that tomorrow morning, just after 10 o'clock. And do not miss Kate McCann and Stig Abel on Times Radio Breakfast from 6 tomorrow. Kate's here. Hi, Kate.
Hi, John. How are you doing?
I'm good. What are you up to tomorrow?
Well, we've got a lot on the programme actually tomorrow. We're going to try and find out what's going on between the BMA, the British Medical Association, and Wes Streeting, the Health Secretary, when it comes to those potential strikes, which we were talking about earlier in the week as a real threat to the NHS at a time when the winter flu season is worse than it has been in many years. We're trying to work out whether or not they are stalled, whether there's the potential for a deal, or whether actually things have gone south between the two sides. So we'll get into that on the programme tomorrow. We'll talk a little bit more about net zero. We know lots of our listeners care deeply about that, so we will try and work out what's holding back net zero, how big the bill is going to be, and what could be done to the energy grid, the electricity grid, to try and turn things around. And John, I think you'll like this one. We're going to hear from the owner of a pub in Bournemouth who came up with the idea to ban Labour MPs. Over 200 pubs now have decided to ban Labour MPs from going in, getting a drink, having anything to eat, because they are so cross about the tax hikes. This is their way of saying enough is enough. So we'll speak to James Fowler about why he's decided to launch that campaign.
200
over 200 pubs. Yeah.
Goodness me, walk around in Westminster, a lot of thirsty looking MPs around the place. So looking forward to all of that. Kate McCann there, who's going to be with Stig tomorrow from 6 on Times Radio Breakfast. Now, Google is preparing another shot at smart glasses. That's more than a decade after it first tried that. The company says it plans to launch new AI-powered eyewear next year, and one features an on-the-lens display. Will Guyatt can tell us more about that. Technology correspondent. Hello to you, Will.
Yeah, hey, John. I think we've had so many false dawns in the world of technology over the last few years. I actually think this is one that might run and might become successful. I'm wearing a pair of AI glasses at the moment, actually, that don't have the screen in them, but I actually find them genuinely useful. But what Google are essentially doing, Google tried this 12 years or more ago with Google Glass, and they had a system that came out then that was just frankly too fragile and too ahead of its time. But now, because Meta have proven with their they've got already just launched one with a display in the US, which is on sale here in the UK in early 2026, that they're selling really well.
Yeah.
And the reason I think this is going to fly, John, lots of people don't want to stick a virtual reality headset on their head, like basically like putting your head in a bin. But lots of people are very used to wearing a pair of glasses, and the tech is shrinking down so much now, you can actually get most of the kit into a normal looking pair of spectacles, and that's why this whole field is suddenly coming alive again.
Yeah, I can see a live picture feed of you now. You don't look at all like a sort of Cyberman or one of those characters in Star Trek, the Borg, sort of part human, part android. You look perfectly normal. I must ask you first, because I want to hear all about those glasses, but do they function also as spectacles?
Yeah, these are I've got prescription lenses in these ones, and I'm awaiting a pair of the Meta display glasses, which I've had to have made to my prescription, and they have a screen on the right lens. And Google are developing them with audio instructions. So these ones I'm wearing at the moment, along the arms, I have speakers, which are bone induction speakers, so I get instructions from my AI assistant through them. But the Google ones will have a screen where you can have messages and various things overlaid on them, and the battery lasts all day, so pretty decent.
I mean, I've got to tell you that you probably may have guessed, I'm a boomer who's easily impressed by tech. But when I hear about these glasses, what can they do? Or maybe I should say, what can't they do? Because I understand they can pick up your voice and take instructions like a normal computer in that way. Can you tell it to, I don't know, can you just play me I don't know, It's a Wonderful Life, the old movie, and there you will see it in front of you on a like heads-up display.
Yeah, you would be able to do that. That would be entirely possible.
Wow.
I can ask the ones I'm wearing to play me Times Radio. I can ask them to make phone calls. I can use them to play music. I can speak to my AI assistant and it can do various tasks for me. And they work really well. They look like they're not much bigger than my normal pair of glasses. That's the thing that's most important about them. You can see there's a sort of little bit of computer and tech stuff in the arms, but the rest of it is pretty normal.
And you can just say then to your glasses, while you're walking along, while you're sitting in a bus stop or waiting for a train, I just want to have a look at page 23 of the latest Computer Weekly, and you can see it in front of you, in front of your eyes.
You could do that. And one of the coolest thing about the current ones I'm wearing, I can say, hey Meta, because they're Meta glasses, they come with their face, but hey Meta, what can I see? And it will give you a really detailed verbal description of what's in front of you. And we tried it the other day with a packet of Korean hot noodles, and it was able to tell me that it was a packet of Korean hot noodles that I had in my hand. So this technology is moving on really quickly for people with accessibility issues and visual impairments and all that kind of stuff too.
Yeah, I mean there's no limit to what this thing can do. I'm now imagining you sitting in the stands at my favourite football club, and maybe you're watching a game going on, and you're telling your glasses to identify who's got the ball or who's within range of a good pass, and it will tell you that too. It will turn you into the best football commentator on the planet.
All that stuff happens. You can look with these glasses at the moment at the door of a restaurant and say, "You read me the best reviews or the worst reviews for it." So
would it recommend the best ravioli or the best pasta dish? It will do that too, won't it?
They can read the menus in certain places, and I know people with visual impairments. The blind comedian Chris McCausland has said something similar, has aided his life hugely because he can now read the menus thanks to artificial intelligence, not just go with the Braille version.
Right.
So I think there's going to be some real advantages to this, and like I said, you don't end up looking like a cheap RoboCop or somebody with something chucked over your head like a bin. They look more like a normal pair of spectacles, and that's why I think these will be the thing. If any new line, any new strand in tech catches on, it will be this.
I mean, you do look relatively normal, Will.
Relatively, I like the word relatively.
And we're talking about AI here. Are we at the point where you'll be sitting there, I don't know, in the restaurant, we're talking a hypothetical restaurant, and then a voice will come up in your ear saying, "Don't even think of reaching for that second donut. You're off your weight losing target." I mean, we must be there too, aren't we?
You'll be close to that because it will be able to analyse and see what's in front of you. So yes, entirely, it's good. That stuff. Now we've got the technology. All that stuff is entirely possible.
Well, I'm awestruck and a little bit afraid and a little bit excited. Will Gutt, so good to talk to you. Thank you, technology correspondent. More coming up on Pienaar and Friends in just a moment.
Across the UK, on DAB, online and on your smart speaker. This is Times Radio, the voice of the times.
It's 6 o'clock. I'm John Pienaar. Welcome to Pienaar and Friends. Tonight, that's Henry Hill from Conservative Home and Mikey Smith from The Mirror. And we're going to be joined by George Grills, Washington correspondent for The Times, after the news at 6:30. So much to talk to George about, so much to share with you. I'm going to hear what you are thinking too. So send me a text, send me a tweet, and we can chat after the news with Tom Noonan.
This is Times Radio.
Good evening, John.
Across the UK, on DAB digital radio, on the free Times Radio app, online and on your smart speaker. Quality journalism, analysis and opinion that speaks for itself. John Pienaar at Drive on Times Radio.
Really good to have you with us here on Pienaar and Friends, an hour of good conversation in very good company, which tonight is Henry Hill, the Deputy Editor at Conservative Home. Hello to you, Henry.
Hello.
Welcome back to the studio. And Mikey Smith, of course, from the Sunday Mirror. Hello, Mikey.
Hello.
Mikey, can I start with you for your thought for the day?
My thought for the day is that it's incredibly troubling that Liz Truss understands the internet better than Number 10.
Okay.
So you'll have seen last week that Liz Truss came out with her new podcast, which is obviously on YouTube as well, in which she sort of rambled for an hour about various fairly right-wing topics that would be very attractive probably to the people she's trying to reach, which is people in America who she would quite like to buy her right-wing ramblings in book form, and it does what it sets out to do. It's exactly what she should be doing if she's trying to reach that audience. Keir Starmer, you may have seen, has launched not only a TikTok but also a Substack newsletter in the last couple of days. And the thing about social media and direct media of this kind is you have to be, or at least appear, authentic. Otherwise no one buys it and no one's interested. And so he's put out the first issue of his Substack newsletter, and it really doesn't know who it's for, because it's not quite simple enough to be a broadly read thing, and not quite nerdy enough to be to attract nerds. But also, it's completely clear from reading the first couple of sentences that Keir Starmer has had absolutely nothing to do with it. It doesn't sound like him. It doesn't, because we've both spoken to him. It's not in his voice. It doesn't sound like him, and it immediately comes across as something that's been written by a Number 10 staffer. Or possibly an AI program. I wouldn't go quite that far. I wouldn't be quite that mean about it. But it's fine, but it's bland, and it's and Keir Starmer's a lot of things. I don't think he's this may shock you. I don't think Keir Starmer's boring. I think he's all right when you talk to him about things he's interested in, and you get him going on, particular subjects. But this is okay. Let's just dive into that for a second. Okay, so I mean, when I sort of said, does it look as if it's an AI program, I do often think, listening to Keir Starmer speaking, and I don't mean this to be mean, I think he sounds like an AI program. His speeches lack character. They lack anything that really engages. I mean, look, we remember the speech at the Labour Party conference in Liverpool. That did engage people. That had a sort of fight to it. You can't be called a vision thing, but he was giving them what they wanted, as well as them knowing their job that day was to receive it well. But it helped them along with all of that. But for the most part, you can see no personality. There were no just human flourishes in it. And when you say he's interesting and amusing, face to face in a whatever can be a normal setting, when you're talking to someone like a former leader of the opposition or prime minister, just tell us why that's. What is he like doing that? Tell our listeners. Right, I can't do this because I have absolutely no interest in football whatsoever.
Right, he talks football.
Get Keir Starmer talking about Arsenal. His eyes light up. He's animated. He knows everything.
Yes,
you can tell you're talking to someone who's really passionate about that subject. It's something clicks with him. But it's not just that. If you talk to him right after he's spoken to, when you go on a factory visit, when you talk to someone who's on an apprentice scheme or something, when he has really good, insightful chats with these people, and if you catch him as soon as he comes away from that, he'll tell you what he got from it, and he's
you've got to catch him while he's hot.
Really, yeah. The fascinating one for me was you saw the video of him at the primary school. Where he got told off for doing the 6-7 thing, because the kids aren't allowed to do it because it's annoying. When the kid said 6-7, he got it. He knew what it was.
Yeah.
He understood it. He didn't have to have it explained. This is not someone who, takes a tape home to watch the soap highlights. He knew what it was. He understood it, and he engaged with the kid. He did the action before she did. And if there's surely there's got to be a way of bottling that. But no one has really found it yet.
Yeah, it's difficult to bottle, I don't know, a quick appreciation of a child's game, whatever it's called, 6 and 7,
You've seen the South
and
Park.
then take a dose of it, and suddenly you're prime ministerial material. I put this question to a couple of other friends in the studio a couple of days ago, and I think people thought I was being cruel or I was being satirical. My question was as simple and straight as it could be. My question was, what is Keir Starmer good at?
I think he's good at thinking very deeply about things like human rights and about the challenges facing the country. He does think very deeply about those things. I think he gets angry about injustice, and he gets angry about racism. And people.
Those are emotional responses to something you could call undeniable injustices.
But
racism and cruel treatment of anyone. My question was, what is he good at? And when you say he thinks deeply about human rights, he was a human rights lawyer. He was said to be a good one. Maybe not as an advocate in court, but in terms of assessing a case and deciding what to do with it. That is something that can be performed by AI. So when I ask you, you're looking dubious, Henry. Please do. I'm not trying to be cruel or satirical. It's a genuine question.
I don't know an AI can perhaps simulate the work of a good lawyer, and maybe the right AI can go out and find you case study and all the rest of it.
Yes.
But I just did a piece the other day, sort of as a satirical legal analysis of something. So, but really good, being a really good lawyer is actually really high level, creative and analytical work, right? Because you need to not only be able to sort of dig through a whole load of case studies and see how they've applied in specific cases, but you also need to be able to work out how maybe you can interpret these things
AI can
so
do
that they benefit. No, I don't think as well. I think it's nonetheless something that he is good at, and I don't think that AI can do it as well, at least not yet. Maybe there will come a point when we've created a computer that makes being human redundant. But I don't think that we have
I
yet.
use that example because not long ago in that chair, Mike, I was talking to a professor of law who was telling me precisely that AI could do that, could comb through the limitless amount of case law that you need to understand the outcome of particular arguments in court, be fed in a problem, join the dots in no time whatsoever, and come up with a persuasive structure of a case and an argument backed up by the relevant legal references, and turn it no doubt into a speech which can be delivered by a case even when it doesn't speak terribly well, and win a case. That's why I put that. And again, I'm not going to pursue this much further because I'll ask the question at some point in the future and maybe get an answer that makes sense to me. Unless you want to answer it, what is he good at?
What's Starmer good at? I have not met him. But I would suspect, based on his profile, that he is good at sort of very procedural stuff. If you think about his work at the DWP, sort of administrative, is the machine working properly? Is it oiled properly? That kind of thing.
Yes.
And again, the kind of stuff that you need to be good at as a lawyer, which you can still be good at even if a computer can now do it.
Yeah.
Right. I think that there doesn't seem to be any dispute that he was very good in his legal role. I think that the challenge for that is that actually, from what I've read, he seems to have come into public service in politics with a rather unpolitical conception of what public service and government actually is.
Yes.
And so that's one of the areas where he's fallen down.
He's not a politician.
But also on the subject of communication, writing and public speaking are both skills that you need to learn and practice. And actually, anyone who starts writing, I edit young writers all the time, and it's sort of clunky, and they've got this kind of leather-bound prose that they've got from university, and it doesn't sound organic. Public speaking is the same. You've got lots of people who are very, chatty and lovely in person, but if you put them up on a stage, they freeze up.
Yes.
So I think he simply hasn't learned those skills.
Yeah. I mean, if you were asking me for a list of things that he's good at, first of all, I'd struggle, and secondly, public speaking would not be anywhere near.
Well, I didn't say it was, just to be clear. But
I want to throw it out there because honestly, I'm not. This is not sort of backhanded political satire. If you're out there, you've heard it said often. You really have heard it said often that the Prime Minister is seen by his own side and his own MPs as lacking the essence of what they think a leader needs, a vision for the country which can be articulated in a persuasive way and persuade people to follow behind the banner that you raise. You find almost no one saying he's got that. Now, if you've got a view that something we're missing, I want to know what that is. Tell me, please. Text 87222, start with the word Times, or tweet to @Times Radio. Make a case for Keir Starmer's leadership qualities. There must be people out there, lots of them, surely, who have a view on that. Just some of you share that with me. Send in your thoughts. Meanwhile, Henry, what's your thought for the day?
So I'm afraid it's such a big day for the Conservatives that my thought for the day is shop. This is the day, apparently, or a couple of days ago, that the Conservatives overtook Labour in the polls.
Is that the case?
The latest poll tracker. There's a wonderful one. I believe the one that I saw was the one from Wikipedia, which collates all of them and puts them on a kind of timeline, which is a gloriously useful thing. And the little Conservative line has just got over the red line. Obviously, this is very much fighting for third place, because reform is still way up there. But I think it is interesting, and the interesting thing for me is essentially how all of this is feeding into narratives around the kind of the Conservative Party. Are the Conservative Party recovering or not?
Yeah.
Because on the one hand, they've had a few good weeks. They're now in second place.
Yeah.
On the other hand, they're still sort of 6 points down on where they were last November at the end of the leadership contest. Yeah. They're still polling at about the level that saw them absolutely nearly wiped out at the May local elections. And I think that there's this interesting sort of disconnect between a few of these little indicators, which are better than not having them, don't get me wrong. But there's a temptation by some people to turn this into like, we've turned a corner, this is it. Yeah. And it's like, well, guys, just look at the actual number. It still starts with a 1. Yeah. I'm not entirely sure this is but it's a big moment for the party. Obviously.
Okay, so Henry Hill from Conservative Home telling us that in the latest numbers that he's seen, the Tories have overhauled Labour. Henry Hill, as a good mirror man, tell me why that's not awful for Labour, why that's not an awful news.
Because I think some of it is a mild recovery for the Conservative Party. I think a lot of it is the Green Party eating into Labour, which may or may not be a permanent shift.
I asked you for some good news.
Some good news
for the Labour Party.
I mean, the Zach Polanski isn't going to last until the next election. Right. He's going to absolutely implode at some point.
You think so?
Yeah. Your liability.
Okay.
Yeah, I think he's...
numbers are going up.
His numbers are going up.
When's it going to go wrong?
Well, I don't think he's as cool as he thinks he is.
Okay.
And at some point, that's going to take over.
All right. Okay. Cool in the sense of, I don't know.
He is increasingly doing events. I mean, if we talk about authenticity, which is kind of what we were talking about before, at some point people are going to spot that he's not actually down with the kids, and is just a kind of, I'm sure, a lovely man, but a bit of a nerd, and not in. I don't know. There's just something about him. He lacks riz, I think.
He lacks riz. Okay.
If we can use the language of the youth.
Right. So Zach Polanski does not get the Mirror's endorsement, at least this evening. Apparently his eyes are too close together. He lacks riz and other things. More to come on Pienaar and Friends with Mikey Smith and Henry Hill. It's now 6:16. I'm John Pienaar. This is Pienaar and Friends on Times Radio.
Across the UK, on DAB, online and on your smart speaker. John Pienaar at Drive on Times Radio.
Well, now Britain's at the table of the Council of Europe today. It's the beginning of a process where a number of the members of the Council of Europe, not to be confused with the European Union, this is an association of countries that came together after the war to agree on what became the Convention on Human Rights, and is the basis for our own human rights law. Now, it's argued now by the government, by the Labour government, that it's out of time. That it's moved on, time's moved on, and the protections under the Convention and the Human Rights Act that it's based on, they've been so overtaken by such things as migrants, asylum seekers, claiming asylum, being denied asylum, and then using the right to family life in the Convention to avoid being deported, and other such arguments. It's time to change the law, time to change the Convention. And this is a Labour government. Of course, this would have been unthinkable not very long ago. This is not the Tory party, it's not the Reform Party. They would get us out of the Convention altogether. This is Labour. And I spoke earlier to a Labour MP, Rosie Writing, asked her how much this was about closing loopholes, how much was it about keeping ahead of the other parties in what is a policy arms race. Let's have a listen, shall we, to...
People have legitimate concerns when it comes to immigration. And by the way, like I said, I'm someone who really, really strongly believes that immigration is such a positive thing for our society, for the area that I represent and our country. We wouldn't be where we are without immigration. But at the moment, we do have a system that we inherited that is in chaos. And I think people broadly do believe that immigration is a good thing when there is a fair system, one that we've always been a compassionate country. Throughout history, we have gave refuge and a home to people who've needed it most, and that is the fundamental part of being British. But we need transparency, we need fairness, and we are living in a different world at the moment, and one that means that we need, in order to deport people who don't have the right to be here, reform to the EHCR.
So that's Rosie Writing, the Labour MP, talking to me earlier. I also spoke to Dr. Andy Hoxer, who's a lecturer in law at King's College London and Associate Fellow at the Royal United Institute for Security and Defence. He had this to say.
So the convention is over 75 years old, and absolutely it needs to reform, and there are arguments there that are solid that require reform, because any treaty that is older than 75 years was drawn up and established for a completely different era, which that was after the Second World War, and at that time we needed peace and security, and of course to upheld any of those atrocities that happened after the Second World War. But we have changed, and Europe has changed, and we have much better legislations in place. So there is a debate there, and I do agree with those that do argue that the convention has to be reformed. Now, in terms of what sort of reform they take place, absolutely that's up to the debate, and until we kind of see the details from what.
So that's Dr. Andy Hoxer of King's College London. And of course he's right in so many respects. I mean, events have moved on. People have changed. The way people think have changed. Opinions on this subject of human rights law has for so many people changed. Henry and Mikey, what is your thinking on the way this argument's developed?
I think this is kind of risky for Keir Starmer, because Keir Starmer has always been and presented himself as a man of deep principle, particularly on human rights. He was literally a human rights lawyer, and the idea that, well, look, human rights particularly are very easy principles to hold when nothing's at stake, when refugee numbers are low. When there is no conflict in the world that people need to flee from. I don't think the reason we're getting a lot of people coming into the country as refugees now is because the world is safer and we don't need human rights laws. I think it's risky from his point of view, because he has presented himself as this person, and thus there are still people in the country who like that. Who like that he is principled about, and feel that these are Labour principles as well, not just that these are Keir Starmer's principles. That he is looking at changing something that is very sort of deeply important to a lot of people in this country.
Right. And just picking on that thought in purely political terms, is this then, when you talk about a risk, are you talking about an area, maybe another area, where the Labour Party can't reach out and bring back people who've gone off to reform because those people have gone? It's just going to push some of the people they did have off to the Greens and maybe the Liberal Democrats. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I suspect that is true. And I suspect that's a calculation that has been made because people who used to vote Labour aren't going to vote. People who used to vote for Labour for these reasons aren't going to vote for Reform or the Conservative Party. They're going to go to other parties, either who have little chance of, who are more likely to come to second place in a lot of places, or as helped them during the last general election, go to the Lib Dems so they can fight off the Tories in the south. I think there has been a calculation made. I think it's risky because you're losing the people who you would be losing in that case are people who are sort of dyed-in-the-wool Labour, core members, and they're the people who campaign for you and back you up when you're having trouble. And I think this is risky.
Okay, Henry.
I mean, I think that the characterisation of the debate it was wrong there, because if the ECHR was still the same thing that we signed in 1948, no one would have a problem with it, in all likelihood, and we wouldn't be leaving. When we signed the ECHR, capital punishment was compliant with it. The corporal punishment, that's beating of criminals, was compliant with it. It was a very, very de minimis set of rules. And it also didn't have a court. And the problem is, one, they invented the court a few years after we signed it, and two, that court then starts doing case law. And gradually the meaning and the scope of these rights has continually expanded. And so it's actually fairly ridiculous to talk about whether or not you support human rights or not, because there is no fixed definition of them. You might have supported one variation of what those sentences meant a few decades ago, but you don't support what they mean now. And so the European Convention of Human Rights is not out of date. It is actually the modern interpretation of the convention that people have a problem with. And this is why I think any attempt to update the convention is probably doomed in terms of trying to keep people in it. Because if you think about the way that we do things politically in a Westminster system like ours, every new parliament can change the law. And that means that your lawmaking authority and your democratic political system are operating on the same timetable. Whereas with the convention, the case law gets handed out all the time, right? But reforms to the convention is a very, very complicated process that only happens once every few decades. And as long as that keeps happening, you will continue to have the case law of the ECHR running ahead of the politics of human rights in the countries governed by it, and that will make the system unsustainable. So I understand why Labour is doing this, but fundamentally I do not think that this is a sustainable model.
Okay, Henry. So one of the objects of this, there's a few objects obviously. One is to get people who think that we're being taken for a ride every day in the courts. I don't know what the volume of these cases, by the way, is, where the Human Rights Act is being used to avoid a deportation that most people think was perfectly fair. But one of the objects is to allow this country to refused asylum seekers to hubs, not in unsafe countries, but in countries that are deemed to be safe. Will that not? If that happens and people are sent to hubs, I mean, you can have a long argument about how much of a deterrent this might be, how often it might happen, but would that not do the government some good? Would it not serve their purpose?
It might be, but the problem with the asylum system is not the number of people trying to claim asylum. It is that the system is not set up to deal with the number of people trying to claim asylum, and there is a massive backlog. And if we are a country that accepts asylum seekers, which we are, then we need to price that in. We need to have a system that can deal with that, and we do have a system. It's just been very, very badly under-resourced for a great number of years, and has ended up with this massive backlog. If we're talking about the number of cases in the courts, it's pretty small. The number of decisions against us is pretty small, and I think, to go to Henry's point, I think yes, the convention has been updated through case law over the years, but so have the horrendous acts that people have learnt to do to the people of their country. That those have changed. So yes, case law exists. That's why case law exists.
But that means
to
that
deal with that.
but that means that you can't simply say, "Do you agree with this principle?" But this is the problem with any codified constitution: right to a family life, because the right to a family life could mean 100 different things depending on the case law. So it's actually, you can't simply say you either agree with these or you don't. But the specific meaning given to them by case law matters, and because that can change the meaning, that means that you need to have an active consent mechanism. You cannot simply say, "You signed up to this a few decades ago. The meaning of it has been changed by case law, but you've still consented to it somehow."
It's Henry, from the Conservative perspective, as the man from Conservative Home, is the policy of getting out altogether, is that a winner politically? I'm just looking at this opinion poll numbers. Most people don't want to leave. Most people want to stay. The numbers, it's quite a big margin, between 46 to 51% prefer to remain. The number who want to leave is 27 to 29.
Sure. Although, of course, that's the overall national average rather than the, as you imagine, the right-wing side of the electorate in which the Conservatives are fishing. But it's also not simply about that. The people in the Conservative Party who are really driving the policy of wanting to leave want to do it because they think that is the right policy. Not simply because it polls well or doesn't poll well. They think it's the right policy in its own terms, some of them, because they hold the sort of principal position that I just set out, that you should have rights fundamentally within the political constitution, but also because it's the only way to affect potentially a lot of other policies regarding things such as changes to anything from welfare to immigration to all kinds of things. They become a lot easier in practice if you've withdrawn from the ECHR. Now, as a matter of pure practical governance, nobody needs to leave, because in Britain you can simply do what Tony Blair did with prisoner votes. In our constitution, you can simply pass a bill that says this is not compliant with the ECHR, and then that's it. But people have proven hugely unwilling to do that. So I think that what you might end up seeing, if we don't end up leaving, is simply more and more use of that carve-out clause, where people say, yes, we're still members of the ECHR for normal intents and purposes, but in this case we are opting out of it. That's something the British Parliament does allow you to do.
We should remind ourselves that this is the beginning of a process. There is a powerful body of countries together saying we need to change the bill in these various ways, but that doesn't get you there. You need a unanimity to change the position of the Council of Europe on these things, and that process is only just beginning. And we're going to leave it now, certainly for the time being, and say hello to Kate, who takes over at 7 o'clock. Hello, Kate.
Hi, John. We'll take a focus on the resident doctors' strike, formerly junior doctors, of course, and the BMA that'll put forward the offer from government to its members, and it focuses around training posts, on opportunities for UK medical graduates to be prioritised over those from overseas. And this is an issue, until you really read into it, you don't understand the extent of it. There's a brilliant column from Fraser Nelson this weekend. He spelled it out absolutely plain and clear, that you may qualify as a doctor, you may be lucky enough to get onto a subsidised course to become a doctor, years and years of training, but at that point it becomes incredibly difficult for you to get a job. There are around twice as many people wanting to be GPs, for example, than there are places. If you want to be a neurosurgeon, 26 to 1 is your chance of getting a post there. So there is a huge disparity. Too much the foreign workforce coming in and filling these places that should be occupied by young British doctors. And that's what Wes Streeting is seeking to try and amend. More opportunity, more jobs, more money in the pocket of young British doctors here. So we'll take a look at whether that is going to work. Does that strike the right tune? It's more complex, it's more in depth, it takes a bit more understanding than a simple pay rise, but would it work? So we'll take a look at that. We'll also have a little look at those new Labour peerages that have been announced today. Keir Starmer, of course, will want to use that political might to force new bills through the Lords. And here's a curious one for you, and it's good news for the Times as well. The US Secretary of State is going to switch the US government departments back to using Times New Roman. This, of course, originated, it was designed by the Times in 1931, and Anthony Blinken, the former Secretary of State, switched to Calibri, the font Calibri, because it was thought to be better for people who suffer from disabilities. It was thought to be a more friendlier, less complex, simpler font, effectively. Marco Rubio is having absolutely none of this at all. He says that he's going to abolish yet another wasteful DEIA programme. The department, he says, his department returning to Times New Roman as its standard typeface.
Yes, I think I've seen that described as somehow a stroke in the culture war. I don't get it. What am I missing?
Take the win. Take the. I mean, isn't Calibri just the basic font that the default font of Microsoft Word?
Well, apparently they bought in Calibri because Windows Vista in 2007 took out Times New Roman.
It still has it in its font base, but it's default.
Yeah, but it was no longer
Calibri,
its default font. As far as Marco Rubio is concerned, it was just a wasteful diversity move switching to Calibri. So we're back to tradition.
Okay, look, here we are at the Times, part of the Times family. Let's take a win, even if we have no particular idea why it's a win. Anyway, Kate, looking forward to your show. 7 o'clock. Now, more coming up on Pienaar and Friends. We're going to go stateside and talk to our colleague in the Washington Bureau about all that's going on there. It is now time at 6:33 for the news with Tom Noonan.
Across the UK, on DAB, online and on your smart speaker. John Pienaar at Drive on Times Radio.
And here on Pienaar and Friends, Henry Hill from Conservative Home and Mikey Smith from the Mirror. And we're now joined by George Grills, the Washington correspondent for the Times. Hi to you, George.
Hello.
Hi. Really interested to get your take on the latest, the state and the feel of the transatlantic relationship as it's perceived there in Washington. And you'll have seen, last night actually, the Pope Leo, was very critical, for a Pope, actually for anyone, of the position taken by President Trump towards the transatlantic alliance. In his interview the other day, in that policy paper over the weekend, he said he was deliberately breaking up the alliance, which was a bad thing. And from a Pope, that's pretty blunt. And you can feel more of a chill in the air. I mean, the relationship you sort of feel between Washington and Europe is as strange as the smile on European leaders' faces when they're in the company of Donald Trump. How is this felt in Washington? Because the policy paper at the weekend was pretty blunt stuff, and his interview with Politico even more so, talking about weak European leaders, talking about the decay of European society and so many other things, how he wants to intervene in European politics to the point of helping challenges to those leaders. And Anthony Beaver, the leading historian, earlier on described that as regime change. How is that being felt from your side?
Well, bear in mind, this hasn't just come out of the blue. I mean, I think it started when J.D. Vance came to Munich for the security conference, which is usually, an occasion for the US and Europe to celebrate the transatlantic relationship.
Yes.
And he basically castigated all European countries for their approach on immigration, and he cited kind of freedom of speech specific instance in the UK. So this has been kind of bubbling up for a while. But I have to say the language, when you see it written in black and white in the national security strategy, where it talks about, Europe in danger of becoming majority non-European,
yes.
and words that you would probably associate with the Great Replacement theory, that kind of, a pretty far-right talking point for a long time, which was about, the ethnic makeup of Europe, and that basically being reflected in US foreign policy is quite extraordinary.
Yes. I mean, I spoke a little earlier on to Carla Sands, a former US ambassador. She served in Denmark, and she was making exactly the point you were making there about European culture being overwhelmed by immigrants and the culture imported from elsewhere. When I put it to her, is she aware of the proportion of Muslims in this country, in the United Kingdom? Well, she spoke about London being overwhelmed. She didn't touch on the fact, I'm not sure she realised, that the UK has a 6.5% Muslim population. The figure for France is 10%, which cannot be described as overwhelmed. It does not bear out the Great Replacement theory, one might thought. But it was antagonising, wasn't it, to many in Europe, even if it was consistent with what J.D. Vance said at the Munich conference, and this when he went to visit the AfD, the far-right party in Germany. But this is testing that relationship in a way more so than we've seen in the past, George. And I wonder if that in any way sparks more of a debate in Washington, or any concern in American politics on the Republican side.
Well, you have to see it as consistent with what is happening in domestic US politics as well. So, I mean, this comes a few days after Trump talked about Somali immigrants in the US being garbage.
Yes.
And there's been a lot of discussion about, he's introduced this kind of visa ban on 19 countries, which echoes the Muslim ban, as it was called, during his first administration, when citizens of a similar group of nations were blocked from coming to the US. So you have to see the national security strategy as basically regarding Europe as an extension of the US, and it's about spreading the MAGA ideology to Europe, about exporting that type of politics to Europe. So that is what I think is reflected, and they're particularly sentimental, it has to be said. I mean, they literally used that word, I think, in talking about the relationship with Britain and Ireland, how the US has this kind of sentimentality attached to these two countries that did so much in kind of the forming of US history. And so, again, if Britain and Ireland, and particularly the UK, and you saw Trump again talking about London and Sadiq Khan, is singled out for attention, that explains it. Because bear in mind, there's a lot of fondness for the UK. I mean, after all, Trump has been twice this year alone. He went on holiday to Scotland, then he came back for the state visit. J.D. Vance also chose to spend his summer holiday in the Cotswolds. Kash Patel went on a golfing holiday to Scotland. There's no doubting the fact that they admire and like the UK and celebrate its culture. And they, you've got to see what their national security strategy is as a kind of continuation of the political campaigning that has kind of defined the US under Trump for almost the past 10 years.
Henry Hill from Conservative Home. When you sort of saw, heard, read that interview with Politico, with the choice of words was what was sort of say remarkable about that. The content in some ways was familiar, was in accord with the theme. What were your immediate thoughts?
I mean, it was nothing new, as you say. If you follow the evolution of Donald Trump's politics and developments in the United States, I think in terms of the relationship with Europe, all that we could really say is we were warned, right? Like, Donald Trump has been president before, and he has always been very vocal about he takes a much more old-fashioned, because people forget, because of the 20th century, that America historically, its default setting has been isolationist. It had to be dragged into the world wars, right? And Trump essentially represents a reversion to that kind of mindset. He views all of these foreign entanglements as enormously expensive, completely irrelevant to America's core national interests, and he particularly resents the perception that Europe is freeloading on American defence spending.
And there's a tradition of that thinking in America.
Well, there is.
On both sides of the aisle.
It's never really been in the dominant... This is a crucial thing. It's never been in the dominant position before. It's always been on the fringes. And we are now in a position where we have a president who not only believes this, but is increasingly prepared to act on this. And that includes not merely potentially cutting down defence spending in Europe, but also actively sidelining European leaders from things in Ukraine on the basis that he's the one paying for Ukraine's defence. And Europe should have stepped up by now and changed its defence posture vis-a-vis the United States. So that, I think, is the thing that leaps out to me the most, is that we have no right to claim to be surprised by this. Maybe some of the little bits of language that he uses are new and newly unpleasant, but the broad pattern has been clear for a long time.
Oh, you can be unsurprised and still dismayed.
Sorry, yes, of course.
But as a conservative, as an Atlanticist...
I'm not an Atlanticist.
You're not a natural supporter of the close relationship with America?
No. I mean, no.
Beyond the point of saying we need to stand on our own two defence feet, you can be an Atlanticist and still think that.
Yeah, but I'm not an Atlanticist.
Okay, well, tell me why you're not an Atlanticist.
I think that if you look at the way America has never been a particularly good ally to the United Kingdom, frankly, it arrived very late in the First World War. It then arrived late in the Second World War. Its treatment of Great Britain during the Second World War was actually fairly disgraceful. It took critical bases off us in exchange for obsolete destroyers. It then did absolutely everything on Lend-Lease. It ended Lend-Lease the day that the conflict in Europe was deemed to end. And then you have Suez. Like, there's really, apart from Maggie and Ronald Reagan got on, but even then, he had to kind of be boxed into supporting Britain on the Falklands.
I'm quite wrongly casting you as a member of the sort of conservative strain that thinks the American relationship is extraordinarily valuable. It's indispensable.
I think the special relationship is. I think the term special relationship is a little bit cringe.
Oh no, that's so, and that's been so for years. Did I even say special
obsessing where the bust of Churchill is and everything else? I think you need a much more sort of clear-eyed. We are usually countries which have broadly similar interests, but I do think that we need a much more clear-eyed relationship with the United States, and that often what Atlanticism represents really is British politicians getting to strut around on the world stage writing checks they hope America will cash.
Yeah. And look, I hear so much of what you're saying, and I totally get where you are coming from, and I totally accept that we've been in Europe so asleep on the job, taking American support so for granted, taking the peace dividend, and as Carlos Sands argued, I think in this respect, at least accurately, using it to buoy up our own welfare system and not do anything like enough to secure our own defence and keep the society that we value so much safe. I agree, that's altogether true. But when though, and you're not, I now hear an Atlanticist, but when you hear...
I have written about this, so people can Google it if they want a longer explanation.
Okay, it's a gap in my reading, one of many gaps in my reading. But when I hear the president talking about failed leaders in Europe, of a decaying society, and the idea of supporting true patriotic parties, which obviously means, if it means anything, it means interfering in the domestic politics of that country, whilst claiming to deplore any kind of interference anywhere else. And when they talk about free speech being all important, and then I see that the travellers to America, Henry, apparently, are going to have to show their social media records before they cross the border. What has that got to do with free speech?
Well, I mean, it is the privilege of superpowers to be hypocritical, and it always has been. You can see this. We will intervene in some places to say that there is a right to self-determination, so we're going to intervene for this group. But then we will deny self-determination to another group of people, but depending on whether or not they're on our side or not. This is just how this works, right? And of course, the United States. I suppose you could probably make an argument, although I don't want to steel man the Trump administration, that it's about an internal regime of free speech, not external threats and all the rest of it. But I've got no idea what they want. But yeah, every regime, every powerful governing regime has been hypocritical. Trump, actually, frankly, one of the weird things about him is that in foreign affairs, he's less like that than anyone else, because he's much more willing to sort of walk out and say exactly what he thinks, to do an explicitly.
There's nothing very virtuous.
Oh no, I'm not saying. I did not describe it as virtuous, but I'm just saying that he will go and do just an overtly transactional deal and not dress it up in a whole lot of rhetoric. But every single powerful government around the world is like this.
Okay, you sound very sanguine about. I'm really keen to get Henry's
it's not
Mikey's
good,
view in just a
just
second.
not
But before we
surprising.
do that, on that question of, look, it's all transparent, and you could say it's transparent. The argument for the president cashing in on the presidency in a quite astonishing way when it's defended, and it has been, is that it's transparent. Everyone knows that he does it, which does not strike me as the best defence.
Well, I wasn't.
Sorry,
we haven't mentioned
that,
corruption.
No, you didn't. I did.
Right. Okay.
I'm drawing
just
that as a parallel.
Corruption is bad.
No, I think you're also saying bullying by a superpower is bad.
It is bad.
Is bad
Yeah.
too.
Yeah.
I just want to get your feeling about those things, and have a listen to Anthony Beaver when he was discussing what he saw as an American administration, which is seeking to get together a peace on terms that Russia would be happy with, and then get, as he put it, the spoils of war to be shared with Russia. This is Anthony Beaver speaking to me earlier.
Well, the Chinese call it wolf diplomacy, thug diplomacy, I'm afraid, when you're strong-arming somebody into a country, a sovereign country, into surrendering to an aggressor. Who has actually invaded, attacked, and destroyed a large part of that particular country. Yes, I do think that's thug diplomacy.
So that's pretty blunt from Anthony Beaver. Henry, what am I confused? I'll tell you why I'm confused, because three of us are sitting here like a rack of billiard balls, and I'm confusing all of us. Hopefully, what we may lack in hair, we gain in some sort of insight from long service. But I think I'm confusing the two of you, just looking from one to the other.
We, of all people, should be able to tell the difference between ourselves.
Well, quite. George, before we go to Mikey Smith, that sort of argument, I guess it's not unfamiliar. You're going to rightly tell me that as well. The idea of a protection racket, of a foreign policy. Again, when that comes up, that's part of the argument in Washington too, isn't it, between the administration and their opponents? But it sort of goes off like water off a duck's back, doesn't it, off the administration?
Yeah, I think there's a danger of reading too much into what Trump says. I think what Trump says is designed to outrage and provoke and set the political weather. So he always wants to, there's a reason he does 3-4 hours of live on TV kind of comments every single day. He just sucks up all the oxygen of political debate. But when it comes to kind of withdrawing from Europe, I think you do also need to kind of take a look at what has the US actually done to withdraw from Europe, and the answer is frankly quite little. And in terms of the UK, actually you could argue they've committed more resources, because for the first time the UK RAF Lakenheath is going to house US nuclear bombs. So actually, if you look at what assets have been transferred across the Atlantic from the US to Europe, it doesn't match up with the rhetoric. And I do think, this is not just the only example. I mean, if you look at domestic US policy, Trump says we're going to go into Chicago, we're going to go into Portland. It doesn't happen because it gets caught up in legal wrangling. So,
yeah, but that's thanks to the American justice system. It's not thanks to the administration.
Yeah, true. But at the same time, I think he says something, and when he's trying to talk it into existence a lot of the time, knowing that it might not happen or whatever. It's all just part about constantly campaigning. It's difficult to discern in this administration when they're governing and when they're campaigning, because they treat everything like they're still on the stump, and everything's an election. So. Yeah, I think particularly in the UK's context and in terms of NATO, what assets have they withdrawn? There was a brigade in Romania that was surged there, but that was arguably they had reason to withdraw it after several years. But moving nuclear bombs to the UK is a pretty big step. So actually, that is a fairly large commitment of resources where they have massively changed their tune compared to the Biden administration is on Ukraine, and I think that's a simple. Trump takes the transactional approach to it. He says, what does Russia have, and, what leverage do they have, and what does Ukraine have, and what leverage do they have, and he just sees everything stacked in Russia's corner.
Right. Mikey, when it comes to the British government's approach to all of this, is there any sense or need or use in an evolution of approach to the United States, or is it just about trying to stay on his good side as far as possible, putting in place whatever contingency you can to try and do more as the space widens, and suck it up?
I think we have. Well, I've said since pretty much day one when he was re-elected that Keir Starmer would be nice until he did something we couldn't put up with. And
did something, or just said something?
Probably did, but I'm wondering whether that line has been crossed already, because we're seeing a Western democracy, America no less, that is not only leaning towards isolationism, it's leaning towards white supremacism in its policy, in its communication. Trump is being openly racist in his speeches day after day now. This is not him running his mouth off. This is the policy of the administration, is taking on ideas from the far right. Great Replacement is at the core of what he is trying to do, and he's trying, as you said before, I think he's got this idea that he has to save the West from invasion. Is certainly the implication in a lot of the things he's saying, which is certainly a far right idea. And I wonder if we, as a sort of Western liberal democracy, because we haven't seen a country like America be run by an avowedly white supremacist government, we don't really know what to do with it now. You can stand up to him, but why? What good will it do? And at what point is it too much? Do we have to wait for him to deport all the Somali people of Somali heritage who are mostly US citizens already? Does he have to back all the far right parties in Europe and try and make a huge shift in the power base in Europe? How many times does he have to be vile about Sadiq Khan, a Labour mayor of London who is extremely popular in London and in the party, before Keir Starmer stands up for him?
Right. I'm going to get Henry's thoughts on that. And in particular, Henry, is there any need or case or sense in an adjustment in the Conservative Party's thinking and statements and position on the United States and the administration in Washington as things do? Hold your thought. I'm going to come back to you in just a minute. I have to say thank you and good evening to George Grills, as always, in Washington, correspondent for the Times. Thanks, George. As always, really grateful for your joining in. This is Pienaar and Friends. We're going to carry on the discussion in just a moment here on Times Radio.
John Pienaar on Times Radio.
Here on Pienaar and Friends, we've got Henry Hill from Conservative Home and Mikey Smith from The Mirror. Henry, so we're talking about, well, the harder edge, the harsher edge to the words of the President Trump, in recent days, developing, not new ideas, but developing the theme and putting a sharper edge on it than we've seen before. That clearly is what's happening, and some of it really harsh on European ears. The talk of alien cultures taking over the European culture. Great Replacement theory is what it's sometimes been called in the past. It's a kind of an echo of that, and most mainstream politics rejects that idea. Conservatives, as were conventionally, traditionally, are on the side of disavowing any such talk and ideas. When you watch it, do you think conservative rhetoric and positioning should adjust now at this point, which Mikey describes as a bit of a turning point?
Adjust to what? In what direction? Should
the Conservatives take the position of being, the presumption is that they are pro-Trump, and you screw your eyes up. They struck that. Well, look, so is Keir Starmer, but they sort of dig themselves deep into that position too. Should whatever the position of the government, should the Conservatives adjust theirs?
I mean, honestly, my advice to the Conservatives would be the advice I give to any British political person, which is you don't really need to talk about America all the time. This country has a huge number of problems, and you can just talk about those. Now, admittedly, I'd maybe go further than some other people. I think that anyone who's seen The West Wing more than once or read more than 2 volumes of Robert Caro should be banned from public life. But nonetheless, you actually can, week to week, talk about Great Britain and Great Britain's problems in their own terms. And I think that it is, and it's especially dangerous for the right, and I do think that the right needs actually more of a sort of psychological firewall, because we share a common language with America, and there's a lot more money in American politics, and so it's very easy for British politicians or think tankers to end up going over to the United States to some event or other, getting their heads turned, and there's this really unhelpful, we've seen this with Liz Truss and what's happened to Liz Truss after she lost office, and they end up getting steeped in this American sort of right-wing culture, which is completely alien to the United Kingdom, and they come back sounding like crazy people. So I don't think that you particularly, yes, you should probably maybe. But again, the problem with this is if you ever get his government and he's there, you then need to be nice to him, which is the challenge. But if you're the opposition, you don't need to be talking about foreign policy issues all the time. Most voters don't decide their vote on foreign policy issues. It's never a high salience issue with the public. Just pick domestic issues and focus on those. That would be my advice.
So don't get into a fight if you don't have to. I hear that loud and clear. But we've just seen a global foreign policy document from the United States which spoke about getting involved with and encouraging and helping along patriotic parties. And when that was written, I think it said that Stephen Miller, the Deputy Chief of Staff of the White House, had a lot to do with that, kind of hard-edge advisor to the President. He was not thinking about the Conservative Party. I mean, if I could persuade the Conservative Party to adopt a less Atlanticist foreign policy, I absolutely would encourage it to do that. But think about, seriously, what's the alternative? Because if you want to do a serious defence policy that's not just Britain on its own, you've got really 2 options. You've got the America-based model, or you have a hypothetical other European model, which would primarily be the main defence partner, and that would be France, a country where the far right comes second in every single presidential election. So it's not that there's a very easy alternative here. Sometimes we talk about we frame European leaders and as if that's simply a nice, uncomplicated alternative to America. There is a decent chance that several big European countries, most obviously France, which is a nuclear power, will have hard right, far right governments within the next 10 years. So it's a really, really unpromising field of policy choices. All right, I will have to leave it there. I would so love to go on. But Henry Hill, Conservative Home, and Mikey Smith-Mill, thanks so much for coming. Let's do it again very soon. Thank you for listening. Our producer was Sophia Johansson, and Isaac Marley was on the keyboards. Kate is up next, and this is Times Radio.
Across the UK, on DAB digital radio, online and on your smart speaker. This is Times Radio, the voice of the times.
Thanks, John. Have a great night. It is 7 o'clock. It's the evening edition. Coming up...
What I see is a strong Europe, united behind Ukraine and united behind our long-standing values of freedom and democracy. And I will always stand up for those values and those freedoms.
Keir Starmer's response to Donald Trump's